we got Councilman Henderson on.
Should we do a test?
I'm on.
All right, thanks, Jared. All right, good evening. I'd like to welcome everyone out to our city council meeting this evening. My name is Clint Smith. I've been designated as the Mayor Pro Tem to conduct this meeting tonight. You can see we have a few of us here. The mayor will not be joining us tonight. On the line with us currently, which meets our quorum requirements, is Councilman Henderson. And then we anticipate Councilmember Orn joining us as she's attending to another meeting with responsibilities on the water board currently, and she will join us at the conclusion of that meeting. So with that, we will go ahead and get started this evening. We're going to begin with our Pledge of Allegiance, and that will be given by Mr. Ethan Hall. If you'd come forward, please.
Please rise for the pledge. Ready? Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. You may be seated.
Thank you, Ethan. Appreciate you taking care of that to begin our meeting tonight. We'll move on to item 4.2, which is our city council comments and recognitions. We'll open that up for any members of the council to make comment.
Well, number one, I would say it's really good to see all of you here. I wish we were having this kind of attendance at all our council meetings, but we know that we're not very popular. There's other reasons you're here. So just wanted to mention how very cool it was to see the community rally in a very short notice to welcome home silver medalist Ryan White. That was very, very cool. I just saw tears in her eyes coming up the street. It was amazing. So kudos to what a great community we live in to just show that much appreciation and welcome for an Olympic athlete from our hometown here. So other than that, that's all I got.
All right, I will just echo your comments, Steve. Having the opportunity to participate in that, obviously, a great opportunity to recognize the accomplishments of a member of our community, and it was great to have the residents there to support. It was a very cool event. So, Councilman Henderson, any comments? I will take that as a no. Okay, we'll move on to item number 5 on our agenda. This is our public comment. This is an opportunity for audience members to bring any item to the council's attention. Comments will be limited to 2 minutes. State law prohibits the council from acting on items that do not appear on the agenda. Public comments for this meeting will also be conducted electronically. Any person interested in addressing the council may submit a comment by emailing the recorder at harriman.org or by visiting harriman.org/agendas and minutes, where the link to fill out an online public comment form, and you can have your statement read into the public record. To begin tonight, I do have 2 comment forms that have been submitted prior to the start of the meeting for comment, so we will go through those first before we open it up to any others for general comment. First one that we have is submitted by Mr. Kenny Alton, so go ahead and come forward, Mr. Alton, and give us your comment.
Hi, Kenny Alton here. Actually, I'd like to comment on 9.2 later when we get through that.
I'm not sure we have that item actually on for a public hearing. So it would be appropriate for you to give your comments at this time, and then we can consider that once we get to that item.
All right, then I'd like to take the time to thank Nathan for taking on this action item that we have here. When I sat in the first work meeting, I was a little surprised on how the process worked, and he kind of directed me to what the process should be and gave me the information I needed to know to move forward. In that, sending back correspondence back and forth, looking at the proposals, proposal 1, 2, and 3, which is recommendation number 1, is pretty reasonable, and I think that could work. In the time that I've had that, all of the neighbors, and you'll see in 9.2 when you guys go over it, that everybody in that 300-foot area has been notified. I've got signatures from everybody that it impacts on our street and also on the west side of the street, that the property owners do not own that part. So everybody is in agreement. We had one no on our street that didn't want it to be released back to the homeowners. So 1 out of 15, and the other 9 signatures that we had from the people that were adjacent to the trail have also signed it, that they're okay with it being released and given back to the homeowners. Now, when I was in that work meeting, there was a comment made that the council may not be interested in giving people property just because they asked for it. We need to make sure you guys understand this is property that the homeowners already own. The city does not own this property. The homeowners do, and they've been paying property tax on this. This is just an easement that was given to the city. So there is no ownership, and it's very unique to the city as it's addressed. So, and this area is 10-foot wide, opposed to all the main trails that are 50 and 60 feet wide. So there's a lot of differences between these two, an easement and the city-owned trail system. So I want to make sure that we identify that, and when we look at the options 1, 2, and 3, that actually everything in option 1 has already been in place and already conducted. So with all that information has been given to Nathan, and you guys probably have a copy of it or seen it. So I want you guys to take that in consideration when you look at that proposal. I've talked to several of the homeowners.
If I could have you wrap up your comments.
What's that?
If you'll wrap up your comments for me. You have exceeded your 2-minute time limit here.
Okay, well, take a look at that, and if I get another opportunity, just holler at me.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, next we have a comment form that's been submitted by Mr. David Torgerson. If you'll come forward, please.
I would also like to comment on section 9.2. We're one of the homes that's adjacent to the trail. I actually did not know that we owned that until recently. We've lived in the home for 6 years. We've got a bunch of kids. And the only time that I've seen that trail cleaned up is when my kids have organized service projects on their own to go and clean it because of the goat heads, the briars, the other weeds. We never see people use it. I've got a dog. I would know if people are on that trail, and the only time I hear it is when my kids are out there, most of the time cleaning. So it's being maintained by us, and if we own it, I would like the opportunity to either have it cleaned and usable or returned to us so that we can do something fun with it. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, that is all the forms that were submitted prior to the start of the meeting, so anyone else wishing to make public comment, feel free to come forward at this time.
Teddy Hodges, Harriman resident. I just want to say thanks for the very productive work meeting on Monday. You can definitely tell council has our best interest in hand when it comes to this new master development agreement and annexation of Olympia. And I really appreciate that, being a constituent of you guys and being able to see that. Also, we had our primary election yesterday, and voter turnout was really low. We hope that the citizens will raise their voices in November again and make sure that they're heard. So more voters. So thanks, guys.
Thanks, Teddy.
My name is Greg Polson. I'd also like to add my comments to item 9.2 on the agenda. I've been a homeowner adjacent to the trail and owner of the property for almost 9 years. Just wanted to make note that this equestrian trail is not dedicated to the city. The trail is basically something that the developer put in to entice people to buy those homes. So just to kind of keep that in note as we make our decisions here. I as well have not really seen the trail utilized for what its intended purpose is for. Just to iterate what our neighbors have said, we do spend a lot of time cleaning it on our own, organizing youth activities to go and clean the trail and pick up trash. I alone spend about $100 in weed killer and a lot of time every Saturday weeding my section of the trail. So I think it might be in the best interest of the city to give it to the homeowners so that we can take care of it and do with it what we would like to do, and kind of alleviate the city from their responsibility so they don't have to worry about it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, my name is Ken Fish. I'm one of the homeowners that's impacted. The trail is on my property. Unlike, I guess, the rest of my neighbors, I must be the only one that they talked about before with the, didn't really want you guys to take this over or to have us take it over. I think we need to hold you accountable to what you were supposed to be doing on this property and on this trail. And it shouldn't be left to us. We've already given the property and we already pay the taxes on it. I've been living in the home since 2003, original owner. My yard is landscaped. When we moved in, the fence that was put in, the four-rail post that was put in, wasn't even in yet. So my fence is actually back a couple of feet because I wasn't exactly sure. And my question then is, since I accommodated everything, what would the city do at that point to accommodate me? This would cost thousands of dollars for me to move my fence back and to landscape. And in 2003, 2004, and 5, when we did this, I was able to. I'm not able to at this point. So I would need somebody to come in and do all of this work. I don't feel that should be a burden that I should have to deal with. I believe it's time for the city to come in and do what it's supposed to do. I found out during the course of this also that the house behind me somehow sold off half of their property to a business that's also on 6400 West after the zoning map was closed. I don't know how this happened either. It's just something that's making me wonder about my faith in what the city is doing at this point any longer. So I just wanted to make sure that you knew that.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Appreciate your comments. Anyone else wishing to make public comment tonight? Yes, sir.
My name is Ed Nielsen, and I live in the South Hills community. I have some photographs here that I'd like to.
You could give them over there to our staff. Thank you.
What brings me here this evening is fire lanes, more particularly parking in fire lanes. In our community, it's a constant problem. On any given night, as can be seen by the photographs, I can drive through our subdivision and see multiple violations, with many of them being repeat or constant offenders. The house directly north of us is one of these. Usually he has 2 or 3 cars parked on the main street in a fire lane while his driveway is empty. Right now, they're off the street because one of our neighbors called HPD about the situation, and an officer came and talked to him. The officer told the neighbor that they'd had 5 or 6 calls on him for the same reason. History suggests that within a few weeks, he'll be back to business as usual, which in less than 2 weeks it was. A few weeks ago, we had the same thing with someone to the east of us, an empty driveway while 2 vehicles were parked in the fire lane. My wife called HPD, and an officer came. He called her when he first arrived on site, saying he had to go look at the same thing further south of us. He came back and spoke with the people for a bit, then left, calling my wife again with a follow-up. He told my wife that, and this was the kicker, that he wasn't going to write any citations because he didn't want to piss anybody off. They'll give a citation to someone for going 60 down 134th, but not for citing a citation to someone who violates the life safety ordinance. Several weeks ago, we turned into the north entrance to find vehicles on both sides of the road for 2 of our blocks. It was a tight fit for us. There's no way an emergency vehicle could have made it through. I first contacted our property management company, Evolution Community Management, about this issue in June of last year, and have tried multiple times since, as have other residents, to no avail. One was even told that there are no fire lanes, and that was after Evolution had received an email from Unified Fire Department specifying the requirements. I tried pointing out that it's a life safety issue, nothing. I tried pointing out to the property manager that if something tragic were to happen and first responders were not able to get there because of some cars parked where they shouldn't be, they, the manager and staff, could be held liable because of their inaction even after being contacted multiple times by multiple people, including UFD. Nothing. On July 8th of last year, Deputy Fire Marshal of the West Battalion for UFD sent an email, and there's a copy in with those pictures, to Evolution, both their main email address and the property manager himself that spelled out the requirements. A few months ago, I also posted on our community's Facebook page. At the time, he was a member, and he was one of those who read it, so we can't say that he didn't know. Included were images of acceptable signs and attachments, including where they were supposed to be placed. In part, the email read, "It is the responsibility of the HOA to enforce the parking restrictions so that emergency access is maintained per the requirements of the fire code. And for the safety of your residents..."
Sir, if I can get you to wrap up your time, your comment, your time has expired. Thank you.
One more short paragraph. "Most of the signs are in place, but there are a few that are missing. Why can nothing be done about this? It's not something that's merely a nuisance, though it's that as well. It's a life safety issue. In actuality, how is this any different from someone finishing the basement or building onto the back of their house? I thought one of the main purposes of government was the safety of its residents. And we can't seem to get anything done about this issue. Thank you."
Thank you. Yeah. Okay, anyone else wishing to make public comment this evening? Okay, thank you. Seeing none, we will move on with our agenda. We'll move on to item number 6 on our agenda tonight. This is our City Council Board and Committee reports. So we'll open this up to members of the council for their reports this evening. Go ahead, Steve.
If I might just add one quick point of privilege before that. I know all my fellow council members feel the same way, is that we really value and appreciate public input on all of these issues. There are things that help us make decisions, understand what some of the concerns are, and often spur lots and lots of conversations with staff and public safety people. And so thank you so much for coming and talking about these. We know that the format of this meeting is sometimes unfulfilling to give us all the information and not get any feedback immediately. But please trust that we're taking all this information. We will be following up on it. It will be a part of our deliberations on any decisions that we make. So thank you for that. Just real quick, had a meeting, 2 meetings earlier this week, one with the Association of Municipal Councils. We had a presentation on the 2020 housing affordability study done by Department of Workforce Services, as well as affordability best practices report done by the Gardner Institute. During both of those, it's just clear that affordability is a multifaceted issue when it comes to housing prices and the ability of our neighbors to be able to afford those houses. I also think that the amount that this body may be able to do or not do, any actions that we can or can't take that would affect housing affordability, are pretty limited. But it is something that we continue to talk about. We continue to advocate for homes of all sizes to be built in our community to create a diverse housing market that we hope will at least impact affordability within our own community to the best that we can. Another thing is with the mosquito abatement district. Bad news is that West Nile virus is on the, I know everybody wants to hear this, right? On top of everything else going on. Yes, West Nile virus is still out there. COVID hasn't killed West Nile virus. There are 36 pools in Salt Lake County that have tested positive for West Nile virus. There are 179 pools in Utah that have tested positive. The good news is that the ones that weren't in Salt Lake County are up in Davis County. So we're pretty safe down here for that. There is one person that has been infected with West Nile virus, although it's likely that they were infected out of the county somewhere else and then came back to the county to report it. So they're still doing some research on that. But again, we're grateful for the mosquito abatement efforts that are out there. They continue to work. 29,000 traps are out right now trying to see what's going on and keep track of this. So it is an uptick. It's a concern. So keep using the DEET stuff when you're outside and stay away from the mosquitoes.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Councilman Henderson, did you have any committee reports for tonight?
No.
Okay. I do not have any as well. So we will move on to the next item on our agenda. Item 7, which are our reports, presentations, and appointments. Item 7.1 is the 2021-2022 Youth Council Oath of Office. And we will turn the time over to Destiny Skinner, who is our Youth Council advisor.
Thank you. As you can see, I bring quite the crowd with me.
You.
So I'll just take a brief moment because I know I have a long agenda tonight. I just wanted to give a little update. We had 36 members on our youth council last year with 7 seniors. This year we have 14 returning members for a total of 23 for the 2021-22 term. Last year it was a little difficult with the COVID-19 protocols, not being able to meet together in person very often. We're excited to get back on track this year, starting with the MotoX this weekend. So with that, I will introduce our new members to you guys. And if you will just come up as I call your name. Dagny Andrews. And I apologize, I will probably butcher names. That's okay. So there's that. And then, yeah, if you just want to stand up.
You just
here.
want to come line up front here for everyone to get a good look
Gallon
at you.
Banks. Gallon. Bella Jones. Emma Chapman. Elise Chiari. Jacob Didenhover. Ethan Hall. Malia Height. Nicole Lee. Amber Olson. Liam O'Fikens. Hunter O'Fikens. Hannah Park. Lauren Pelch. Aza. And I'm not going to attempt her last name. Whitney Robinson. Zadie Rojas. Urban Smith. Alyssa Sokol. Chloe Stump, Madeline Weber, and Nathan Sow, and I know they're both not here, so that's all of them. So Jackie will now swear them in.
You guys can cheat and read off your papers, by the way. We won't tell. I guess we get to all squeeze in for a picture together. We'll come down with you.
Might need 2 rows here. Taller people in back. 30 seconds. I think so. Step back a little bit. All right, big smile. 1, 2, 3. All right, will do. Yes. All parents?
So if other parents want to come up, we'll get a picture with you guys as well.
You get to be in the picture. Yeah. Yeah, if you can squeeze by him. We get everyone on this side, take a half step to your left. It's going to be really cramped. All right, right here. Big smile. 1, 2, 3.
Well, before you all just run out the back door, because I know that's where you're heading. And if it were me, I would do the same thing. So, one, I will just say, as a member of the council, thank you very much for your interest, for the opportunity to serve our city. I look forward to the opportunity that I have as a city council member to get to know some of you as we interact on events of the city. You have some fantastic people from the city with Destiny and Councilmember Orn, who oversees the youth council, to help guide you and direct you and give you a really fun learning experience. Parents, thank you for encouraging your children to be involved and to take this step. It is a great opportunity for them to learn a lot about our city and a lot about city government. So I just want to applaud you for stepping up and putting in your names to be chosen for this. It is a great opportunity. So, Steve, any comments from you?
Ditto.
Easily done. All right, now we will try and pretend that we don't watch you all walk out the back door as we continue with our meeting. Have a good evening.
Man, and I thought all these people were here for us.
We've both been here long enough
Yeah,
to know
that's-
different.
No, that's not how it works.
Okay, we'll move on to the next item on our agenda, which is item 8, our public hearings, beginning with item 8.1. This is a public hearing and consideration of a resolution authorizing the direct transfer of property located at approximately 12150 South Mountain View Corridor from Utah Department of Transportation to Hermann City for a valid public purpose. Blake.
Thank you, Council. So just to start with a little background, several years ago, Harriman staff and council began conversations with UDOT to acquire several parcels that were remnants that were part of the Mountain View Corridor. The reason for these discussions were Harriman was configuring properties to establish an auto mall. And the first slide shows the location of where the auto mall is at. And these UDOT properties caused significant issues with the development. They basically impeded the development of the auto mall. So there's actually 2 public hearings tonight, and you'll see all the parcels here. So the second presentation, we'll keep it short. The first one, we'll give more detail here. So you can see there's the subject parcel for this item is the flag parcel as shown on the map. It was part of a larger remnant parcel, and you can see there's a flagpole parcel I've identified. That parcel has already been acquired by the city and cleared, and you can see construction going on out there currently for a new car wash.
And restaurant.
And the restaurant's actually further
On the other side.
to the east, but yeah, the car wash was actually impeded by that flagpole parcel. And the way that the city acquired that was the exact same process we're going through here. We did a resolution, met with UDOT, and then there was actually a trade for some easement for their real property. Let's see, so the reason this item is before the city council is because UDOT has a rule that there needs to be a notice to all the adjacent the adjacent property owners. We figured since Harriman was the only property owner that it was appropriate to have a public hearing in general on this item, just to cover all the bases so that nothing was missed. And that rule is you need to do that public notice in order for UDOT to surplus the property for this type of use, and that's a predetermined price or negotiation that's been done. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions before you open the public hearing. And I guess in your staff report, you can see the staff recommends to approve this resolution.
Any questions for Blake? You have no idea how long we've been waiting for these items and how much work staff, and in particular Blake, has put in to get us to this point. When I still had to read it twice to make sure I was actually reading that it was actually on an agenda. So with that, we will open the public hearing now for item 8.1. Anyone wishing to make public comment on this item, please come forward at this time, and the same time limits will apply as in the public comment at the beginning of the meeting. Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Any online?
Do we have anyone? Thank you, Steve. Appreciate the reminder. Okay.
Motion to close the public hearing.
Okay, we have a motion to close the public hearing for item 8.1.
Second.
Thank you, Jared. We have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? All right, we've closed the public hearing.
And then I will make a motion to approve Resolution R22-2021, declaring the acquisition of real property located about 12150 South Mountain View Corridor, owned by the Utah Department of Transportation to be in the best interest of Harriman City.
Second.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion by Steve and a second by Jared. Any further discussion before we vote on this item? Okay, seeing none. Steve?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well, and that motion carries. We'll move on to item 8.2. This is a public hearing and consideration of a resolution authorizing the direct transfer of property located at approximately 12400 South Mountain View Corridor from Utah Department of Transportation to Hermann City for a valid public purpose. Blake?
Okay. So I'll just kind of go over the differences with this parcel. The last parcel is going to be a deed to the city, I guess, at no cost. And then if the city ever uses any of the property, then there will be a charge that needs to be paid back to UDOT. This one's in the same location, generally, a little bit further south, but this property happens to be the stormwater pond and a remnant parcel above that. The pond is currently used to capture stormwater runoff from the property to the west. As development has occurred, the need for this pond, owned by UDOT and maintained by UDOT, diminishes because every development captures their own stormwater and sends it into the public system and away from this pond. The idea that the city has had for this pond is to actually reconfigure it so that the auto mall will have better frontage along Mountain View Corridor, better visibility. And then that reconfiguration could be an open air pond or a subsurface pond or another pond totally in a different location. So that's still being considered, but this is the general idea. The green on the map shows a subsurface or open air linear configured pond. Went too far. And so this one, there was an appraisal done for this property. The city will be acquiring the property, intends to acquire that property for the appraised value of $900,000. Finance has, we've discussed that cost with finance, and there are several options on how to purchase that. And the finance director has told me that he's felt comfortable with that, and I think we've discussed that in council meetings before. And the recommendation for this one is also to approve the resolution to receive this property from UDOT to meet their rule. So be happy to answer any questions or.
Can you clarify, does acquisition of this property in the stormwater immediately put us any action that we need to take or any other costs that we would incur in regards to managing the stormwater there?
That's a great question. So there is a small amount of stormwater that comes from behind the sidewalk in the UDOT right-of-way along there. And so the agreement after this, if this is approved tonight, UDOT will prepare an agreement, and when the city acquires that property, the agreement will say that we have to continue to maintain that small amount of water. It's a small enough amount that it won't cause any more issues to us than maintaining the pond that's going to be there anyway. So
Okay.
We'll just have to make sure we have enough volume in the pond to accept that water.
Okay, thank you. And Alan, you probably didn't hear, but he was saying that you said we can financially finance this transaction with multiple different options. I didn't want him to put any words in your mouth there, Alan.
Either said that or that you were going to purchase it. I'm not sure which.
I think that was words in my mouth. Well, there are several proposals that they've put forward. Some of them might work. We're going to have to look at them and just see how we will end up. Originally they were talking about that this would be one of the items on the bonding that we did for the road projects. It's kind of a first item there. If that's not what we choose to do, we may have to look at some other options to do it. So, but we are going to have to work on how we actually make this payment happen. So,
Councilmember Smith, if I could add one thing.
Please.
So Blake called this out. I just wanted to make sure that it was very, very clear. This is not the resolution to authorize the purchase of that. It is simply stating that we as the city are willing to accept it and use it for a public purpose. That's one of the requirements that UDOT has with regard to disposing of property to a public entity such as Harriman. So it's a formality of sorts, but it does not obligate the city at this point to actually pay the $900,000.
It just clears the path for us to.
That's correct. It's the first hurdle to get us to that point.
The actual approval for how that will be financed will be taken care of at a later time by the council.
Correct.
Okay, thank you. Very, very good clarification.
I just want to make sure we're not getting out of our skis.
Yep, no, great. Any other questions for Blake before we open the public hearing? Okay, seeing none, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing on item 8.2. Anyone wishing to make comment, please come forward at this time. Okay, seeing none, I will entertain a motion to close the public hearing.
Motion to close the public hearing on item 8.2.
Okay, motion by Steve.
Second.
And a second by Jared, voice from the sky. All in favor of closing the public hearing, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. And any opposed? Okay, I will accept a motion on this item.
Motion to approve Resolution R23-2021, declaring the acquisition of real property located at about 12400 South Mountain View Corridor, owned by the Utah Department of Transportation, to be in the best interest of Harriman City.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Thank you, Jared. We'll do a roll call. Steve?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well, and that motion carries. Okay, we'll move on to item 9 on our agenda. This is our discussion and action items. We'll begin with item 9.1. This is discussion and consideration of an ordinance amending Hermann City Code Title II regarding the structural organization of Hermann City volunteer boards and commissions. Wendy Thomas, our Assistant City Manager.
Thank you, Council. Thank you for allowing me to be here tonight and present this item to you. As you are aware, we discussed this in the May 26th work meeting, and because of our limited number of meetings and being out of town, I was unable to bring this to you before now. So I thank you for your patience in this. As noted in the staff report, staff recommendation is to remove the Be Ready Harriman Committee and the Community Garden Committee from Title II, and per council request, add the Harriman OHV Committee to Title II, and to update Title II as noted in the packet. I want to be really clear in that Be Ready Harriman is just moving under emergency management. It's not going away. Be used as a marketing tool to promote preparedness and to promote CERT. So it's not going away. It's just going away from being a council-appointed board and commission.
And that's going to be overseen by the Emergency Management
In HPD.
Executive.
In HPD.
Got it.
Yes, correct. Additionally, the community garden doesn't go away. We'll still have a big presence at our community garden. It's just not a council-appointed board and commission. Additional updates to Title II include putting a maximum number of committee members on the board. We increased it we put the range from 3 to 7, whereas before it was just open-ended, as you'll recall. We also updated the Economic Development Committee as it has changed over the years in its roles and responsibilities, and the addition of the Harriman City OHV Committee. Here for any questions or concerns, and just wanted to add that we'll be coming at the end of the year with a list of committee members that potentially could fill those committee spots for 2022, as well as a request for a historic preservation ordinance, and that will just allow us to obtain grants from the Utah State Division of State History. So, any questions or concerns on this item?
Thanks for your work, Wendy.
Sure.
Appreciate it very much. Any
There'll be
other
a lot
questions
more
for
coming.
Wendy? I'll just say that obviously our committees and boards are vital to all of the work that we do in the city.
Absolutely.
The work that's done by the volunteers, their time giving, there's no way that we could accomplish all of that just with city staff and those. So that work is vital, and we appreciate everyone's willingness to serve on those boards and make our community better. And again, the ones, Be Ready and the garden are not going away. Just taking on a different function under this current Title II. So, okay, with that, if there's no other discussion, I will entertain a motion on item 9.1.
I'm going to be doing all these because there's nobody else here. So, motion to approve ordinance number 2021-17, amending Title II of the Hermann City Code regarding council-appointed boards and commissions.
Okay, we have a motion and a second by Jared. Thank you. We'll do a roll call. Steve?
Yes, and I'd like to make one comment after.
Absolutely. Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. That motion carries unanimously. Go ahead, Steve.
Just very excited about it. With this, we're updating and adding the OHV committee. I think there's a lot of passionate people in our community about that, and having some ability to get into the weeds, that's a pun intended, on some of the issues regarding OHV trails up in our hillsides and how that might be resolved. I think it's only going to be resolved with committees like this and volunteers getting involved. So I'm excited about that. So Thank
Yes, absolutely. Dwayne, thanks
for
for
your
being
great
here.
work.
A lot of good work. Okay, with that, we'll move on to item 9.2. This is discussion and consideration of a request to release city's interest in an equestrian trail easement. We'll have a presentation by our city manager, Nathan Scherpeski.
Thank you, members of council and citizens who are here for this. We've had a request to the city regarding a 10-foot horse easement that it's off of Valmont Park Avenue, which is, I think, 6315 West, just south, or just to the east of Rose Canyon. This was an interesting easement back when as part of the Hamilton Farms subdivision, in that very first part of it. This was proposed by the developer, a horse trail, an equestrian trail, along the western edges of the parcels being created. We were approached about releasing that easement. It is, for lack of better, we didn't realize it was ours for quite some time, and its maintenance fell behind. We have since begun maintaining it, but there certainly was a history when we have not. I've heard from our parks manager, and once he became aware it was ours, we're starting to spray that and try to take over that maintenance again. So this easement existed. We were approached about eliminating it. The challenge with anything like this is the people right immediately might want to get rid of it. There are certainly others who use it. And so the recommendation before you tonight, we don't have a policy on how to do this, so we can bring you back a policy specific to this, but copying how the state recommends getting rid of traditional right-of-way. You get a petition from a majority of the adjacent property owners. You mail a notice out to all those within 300 feet. You do public postings and try to get others, because there would be other members in the community who could use this. And then council holds a hearing and makes a decision. Anytime you have something that's of value to the citizens, it may not be valuable to everybody, but you need a process so that you can hear that. Both for those who want to eliminate that, maybe in this case a trail, and also for those who may be in support. So my recommendation tonight is to authorize staff to move forward with a process as outlined in this. I know, thank you for bringing up. This was, again, an interesting one. It's this 10-foot bit just on the backside there, on the left-hand side of the screen. My boundaries are correct here. Why did he turn me around here?
Just behind all those lots, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
Right there. You'll see that there's an easement. It's actually on the bottom of the screen there. So there is a 10-foot pedestrian trail there, and I think it's important. Again, it's not a dedicated right-of-way, but it is available to the public. And so before we would eliminate anything like that, there needs to be a public process. We did receive several emails over the last few days opposed to seeing it go away. And so that just highlights why you want a process. So what we're asking for is permission to run a process. Certainly council has the option. You could say, forget that, eliminate the easement. You could say, don't do this process, we're not going to eliminate it, or you can tell us to do a process. It's truly up to you. I believe having a public process probably makes the most sense. Happy to answer any questions.
Okay. Thank you, Nathan. Appreciate that. Is there any questions by members of the council on the item at hand or the recommendation that's before us tonight?
I would just ask, so this Utah Code Section 10-9A-208 is the state's recommended process for disposing of I'm just trying to figure out how that works.
it's the state's rules for vacating right-of-way.
Okay.
This is not right-of-way as envisioned by this statute,
Okay.
but it's a public access that people have been using. And so in looking at that and talking with the city attorney, copying their policy or their provisions to eliminate something the public has been accessing and crossing makes the most sense to us.
Agree?
I agree, yes.
Anything else you wanted to add, Chase, from a legal perspective?
I think the only other thing that the council might consider is that because these are public easements over private property, if you only release those interests on individual pieces, you would have a hodgepodge of public easements on different pieces of private property. So in my opinion, it would be best to do this all or nothing. And that may come into your considerations as you look at this issue, but that would be my recommendation.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm kind of a mind that this is the right way to go. I know that parts of this process have already been undertaken by certain residents in different ways, and I don't think we're interested in belaboring it per se or making it longer. But as we were talking about earlier in our meeting, I think there's value in an appropriate public process to go through for a vacation of a public right-of-way. It's unfortunate, well, not unfortunate, because it is a public right-of-way, it potentially has interest to all of the residents of Harriman. And there may be other residents that have interest in that. So having a public process where it's noticed, allowing people to have their chance to have an input if that's important to them, even though we know nobody's walking down here, we got it. But giving everybody that opportunity just makes it clean and correct, for lack of a better term, a righteous outcome when we get there. So I would be in support of directing staff to initiate that process and then bring it back to us for a decision later.
I'll just really echo what Councilman Shields has said. I think obviously we appreciate those that have been here tonight and given us their public input on at least those that are directly affected. But I think that there obviously is tremendous value in going through a full public process and really outlining this as a policy for us to be able to follow in like circumstances moving forward for our community, and so everyone knows what to expect. So again, not to belabor it, but I think that there's value in certainly a public process and allowing everyone to have opportunity to speak towards it. So
and anything we can do to get an audience to come back one more time.
Yep. Councilman Henderson, any comments on this item?
No, process is the right way to go.
Okay. With that, I would entertain a motion.
So do we need a motion on this item to direct staff, or? I mean, we're not adopting a policy or establishing, Chase, give us some.
You can make a motion, but I think the consensus is also very clear, right?
Okay.
Okay.
So we're good with just consensus.
Okay.
Sounds like we have consensus and direction to help us proceed down to help us get this resolved for the residents of that area. Thank you for being here tonight.
We'll go through the process thing.
Okay.
Feel bad. Glad they all came out.
Okay, we'll move on to item 9.3. This is discussion and consideration of an ordinance amending the Land Development Code amendments in the TM or Technology Manufacturing Zone to remove the minimum master plan area requirements. Mr. Spencer.
Good evening, Council. It's good to be with you tonight. This first ordinance revision is largely cleanup in what has taken place in our TM zone, our Technology Manufacturing Zone. This is your timeline here that we've been working since May to update this ordinance amendment. It did go through Planning Commission and received unanimous approval for this consideration. So the TM zone, again, is a technology manufacturing zone. It's the home of the Bullfrog manufacturing site. It's kind of in the most northwestern part of the city that you can get right now. This is what their lot configuration is. As as Bullfrog came in, or as this part of the city came in for development, it was been anticipated to be much larger area, and then as it actually came into being, it shrunk considerably. So it went from quite a large number of acres down to, I think, 36 acres. So currently our ordinance, and again, this is the home of Bullfrog. Currently, the ordinance requires that a master plan, or in any TAM zone, a master plan is required that covers at least 50 acres. Obviously, with this site plan that's only covering 36 acres, so give or take, that's not in compliance with the ordinance. So as I mentioned, this is largely just to clean that portion of the ordinance up so that this site is in compliance with the overall ordinance. Are there any questions for me on this matter?
I was just saying, I really understand the need to do this right now, and I'm in support of it, but if the TM zone were to expand, if additional land were to be put in, is there a recommendation or not, what we would think a master plan site should really be? I mean, is that 50 acres an appropriate number? Would we want to revisit this? Just considering, it was put in originally with the idea that it was going to include a lot bigger space, and 50 acres was what was established. Now, understand at the end of the process that changed and the area shrunk, but should there be additional land annexed into the city and that zone expands, would we then add back in a acreage minimum?
So this would still require a master plan this takes just the minimum out. So for any TM zone that comes in, it is required to have a master plan.
But there's just no minimum.
No minimum size for it, right? So if
somebody wanted to come in and do 2 acres, that just seems incompatible with the technology zone, manufacturing zone. Does that make sense?
Right, and I'm not sure. I'd have to look at the ordinance and see if there's a minimum lot size in that zone.
Okay.
But that may answer that question.
And again, I don't know that it necessarily applies tonight. I'm just considering this TM zone may apply to other zones in the future.
Mm-hmm.
And I just want to make sure that the ordinance is appropriate for that.
That's something that we can look into.
Yeah.
I think that's a fair question. And I think that obviously with the initial anticipation of that site being much larger than it currently is, that we've obviously proven that it can be very successful. And so we hope that we have the opportunity to expand that out there.
Amen.
But the question is, again, is if we do add that, is there a number that I guess overall may be more appropriate to help that governing go forward? So it's a good question.
Okay,
for sure. Jared, any questions for you?
Nope.
Okay, thank you. All right, with that, I will, unless there's any other questions, I will entertain a motion on item 9.3.
Motion to approve ordinance number 2021-18, authorizing an amendment to the Land Development Code to remove the minimum area requirement for a master plan located within the TM manufacturing zone.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second on item 9.3. We'll do a roll call vote. Steve?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well, and that motion carries unanimously. All right, we'll move on to item 9.4, which is a discussion and consideration of an ordinance authorizing a proposed zoning map amendment request from Symphony Homes for 5 acres located at 13499 South, 7300 West from A1 agricultural to A.25 agricultural. Mr. Spencer.
I'll be up here for a while, so. Again, this is a request from Symphony Homes. They're looking at coming into the city. This would be their first development within Harriman City, and they're looking at about a 5-acre piece of property to come in and bring approximately 10 to 11 lots into the home for single-family development. The application came in February. Did have a neighborhood meeting. Not a lot of concerns there. And then it was recommended for approval at the Planning Commission. This is an item that the Planning Commission was very anxious to see move forward, and one of the recommendations was to work with staff on some density requirements in terms of how to get them to the lot numbers that they're requesting. So So this is just an overall view of where this property takes place, a little bit closer in. And then this is be the overlay of this is a previous submittal. We met with the applicant today. They have an updated submittal. And I didn't have time to update the new submittal with this, but it's similar in size in terms of lots, and the layout is similar as well. You can see how those lots compare with the lots to the north. They're typically a little bit larger. They're pretty wide lots as well. So currently the property is master planned for this agricultural residential, and that allows for the A1, 8.25 zones as well. Currently it is in the A1 zone. This A1 zone would allow for current development to take place up to probably four single-family lots, which, looking at that part of the city, would not be really in character with what's taking place around it. This is their current lot layout that they're proposing. Well, this is not their current one, I should say. This is the one previously that was considered by the Planning Commission. They do have an update that adjusts this plan just a little bit, includes another half-acre lot on the south side of the road there as well. So again, the property we're looking at is about 5 acres. The general plan supports the agricultural residential, which again allows for that A1, 8.5, and 8.25 zones. And the current zoning map is the A1 zone, which allows for, it's a lower density than allowed in the general plan, and allows for the 4 single-family lots. What the applicant is requesting is to be rezoned to the 8.25 agricultural zone, which would allow the 1.8 to 2.5 dwelling units per acre, which more accurately follows the general plan suggestion. And again, allows for approximately 9 to 11 single-family lots. This did receive a positive recommendation from the Planning Commission in a unanimous vote. And if there's any questions, I'd be glad to entertain what I can.
Okay. Any additional questions for Mr. Spencer?
So the 825 allows 1.8 to 2.7?
2.5.
2.5. Is there anything about this plan or this property that would award density bonuses above the 1.8 right now?
So that's something that we're working through the applicant right now on. As you mentioned, the 8.25 zone, the base density is 1.8. They can go up to the 2.5 if they accomplish some of the lot density requirements for that bonus density. And we are working with the applicant. We met with them today, as a matter of fact, and kind of went over some of the requirements that they're trying to fulfill to get that density to move into the area that would be more feasible and better for them. So
the minimum awarded density number, it's about 9 lots is what I'm coming up with?
Well, it would be about 10 lots is what they would be, is what they're I don't want to say guaranteed, but in terms of what they're providing and how it applies to the bonus density requirements, they could easily get the 10 lots. It's in question whether or not 11 lots is possible. They have some provisions that they're looking at that they want the Planning Commission to entertain before they would be able to.
But they also have a plan for a 12th lot too, is that correct?
I believe that we've only seen 11 lots is what the maximum that they've requested.
Okay, I'm just curious because in what was in here, you said there were 11 lots, but then you mentioned that there was a plan for an additional quarter-acre lot on the south side of the road.
No, I was just saying that some of those lots on the south side of the road had been reconfigured, so they had an additional half-acre lot on that side.
Understood. Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
So maybe 10 or 11.
10 or 11 lots is what we're looking at.
And I really like the plan. I like the bigger lots. I think it's a really needed property in our community. There's big demand for that.
The Planning Commission was very supportive of it as well.
Well, and as mentioned, I think it was to the north of that is currently R110, correct?
Correct.
So again, as we look at this area out there in the general plan, it really helps to buffer and transition back into, I think, what the desire really is out in that area.
Yeah, and I think Sherry asked that question, if it's all going to be residential and we're not going to have agricultural, should it be an R zone versus an A zone.
Right.
But I think with the half-acre lots out there and at least preserving the spirit of the agricultural use, I think it's the appropriate decision.
Yep. Yeah, I don't have any additional questions. Jared, any additional questions for you?
No, I'll just reiterate my usual statement that I think it's ridiculous that there are density bonuses for something this small.
And that's also something that
Something staff's looking at.
yes, we'll be looking at that shortly to amend that ordinance and bring that back to the commission and the council.
Yep. Okay, if there's no additional questions for staff on this, I will entertain a motion for item 9.4.
I'll make a motion, but Clint, we're sorry, we're beating you up tonight, man.
This is nothing. You guys
We're
are
rough
easy
on-
so far.
Oh, good. We'll come back with more next time.
If this is rough, I'll take it.
All right. Motion to approve ordinance number 2021-19, approving a zoning map amendment for 5 acres located at 13440 South, 7300 West, from A1 agricultural to A.25 agricultural.
Second.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion and a second by Steve and Jared. We'll do a roll call. Steve?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes, and that motion carries unanimously. We'll move on to item 9.5, which is discussion and consideration of an ordinance granting the proposed general plan amendment request from Jeannette King for 1.7 acres located at 6387 West, 13100 South, from low-density residential to commercial. Mr. Spencer.
Thank you. So items 9.5 and 9.6 are very closely related, so you might get a lot of repetition in these next two items. The first is for a general plan amendment. 9.6 is for the rezone portion of that request for the general plan to change to allow for a commercial zone to take place in this area. But again, this is a request from the King family. They currently live on the property, and we're looking at approximately 1.7 acres that we're looking to change the general plan designation for, and then potentially apply a commercial zone to that for future development. This request began in April. Again, it went through Planning Commission approval in June, again, and is here before you today. This is the subject property location. It's recently at this intersection, there's been a traffic light installed there, just kind of preluding the way for additional development. Just to the west of this property is the Hidden Oaks development, which includes over 1,000 units. With the potential of Olympia being annexed, there may be even more units in that will be accessing Harriman Highway down by this property as well. This is the current general plan map that's on the books of the city today. As you can see, a portion of that property, the northern portion of that property, is slated to go commercial, as well as some of the other adjacent properties in that intersection. And then current zone on that right now is the 8.25 zone. They do have a concept plan that they've provided, just showing that their desire is to have a gas station, as well as some potential areas for office buildings on the property. This was what the initial concept plan would look like. Of course, in this approval, you're not looking at the concept to approve this concept plan, but just for an idea of how development may take place. There are some concerns and issues with the site plan layout, but just so you are familiar with what they're kind of looking at doing. And then the additional portion, or the additional property, would be potentially developed later on in the process. So this is a photo of the property. This is looking southeast from across the street. And then this is looking northeast on the property. So this is looking at the portion of the property that's currently slated under the general plan to be zoned commercially. This is kind of an overview, just to give a better perspective of where this property is and how it relates to other adjacent residential properties in terms of considering this to be rezoned to a commercial zone for a commercial use. You can see directly on the other side, there are, you've got a single-family neighborhood there. Again, the neighborhood meeting was held on the 7th. These are the concerns of the surrounding residents that were at the property or at the community meeting. In terms of general plan compliance, as I mentioned before, there is a portion that's slated to be commercial in our existing general plan. As we move towards adopting our draft general plan, this area is shown on the draft general plan as a neighborhood commercial. A neighborhood commercial is explained in the draft general plan to be something that is more pedestrian oriented. The primary mode of transportation was mentioned in the plan to be bicycles and walking, and then the secondary would be car and automobiles and that kind of transportation. This would typically apply to like a C1 or an OP zone, something along those lines. But in terms of general plan compliance, we're looking at promoting public interest, conserving property values, avoiding incompatible development, encouraging appropriate use in development, and promoting the welfare of the city. And as I mentioned before, the zoning, when we consider this for a rezone as well, a lot of those same provisions come into play here. And so I'll try not to be redundant, but I'm guessing that I will be. So again, this is located just down the street from Hidden Oaks with more than 1,000 units planned and coming. Much of that traffic is probably anticipated to come along this road as it moves east to west. There is a rezone proposal included to rezone the property to C2. And those conditions, again, are promoting the public interest, conserving property value, avoiding incompatible development, encouraging property use, and promoting the welfare of the city. So the consideration before you tonight is whether or not the City Council would consider or would approve the proposal tonight to change the general plan designation from agricultural to a commercial land use designation, which would then again pave the way for that commercial zoning to take place as well. So if there are any questions, that's all I've got for this one.
Okay. Thank you, Clint. Just to note for the record that Council Member Orn has joined us after, I'm sure, a riveting Truth and Taxation hearing for the Water Board. Okay. Any questions for Mr. Spencer on this particular item? This is 9.5.
I got some comments. I've got some
Go for it.
here. For this neighborhood commercial or new zone, right? This idea. Can you illustrate a little bit more what the vision of that particular zoning is? I mean, if we're going to call it neighborhood commercial and it's just going to be a gas station and a car wash like lots of other just regular commercial zones are, what's the purpose of this new zone application versus just a traditional commercial zone?
So just for clarification, their current proposal falls underneath what is currently on the books of the city. So the general plan calls for commercial, which would support the C2 zone as well as other commercial zones. The draft general plan that hasn't been adopted yet, as I mentioned, it does support that neighborhood commercial, and I think it would be more of, maybe stores that would kind of support the surrounding residential areas in a pedestrian-friendly type of way. I'm sure that, a parking lot and car traffic is something that would completely be anticipated, but it may not be the primary mode of access to that particular site. Maybe it's, I don't know, a smaller retail shops or some kind of restaurant or something like that that supports that surrounding community. typically uses that are allowed in the C1 zone versus a more permissive C2 or I guess just the C2 zone.
I'm just going to articulate this. So first of all, I love those giant trees. Those are awesome, beautiful trees. That's not the most important consideration. I'm just saying that. But the one concern that I do have, though, is the residential aspect remaining there. So I have a couple of questions about that. Do we have any other commercial parcels in the city that have a residential carve-out piece like that or an exception for a residential unit in them?
Not to my knowledge. So this entire piece would be considered for rezone, and then development would just take place in stages. So that the existing, as was shown in the concept plan, potentially that development would take place around that.
Yep.
And then later on, that that additional home would fall into that.
So I understand the plan. I see what's going on. I guess I'm just trying to articulate, is this a unique situation in our city? Like, what we're being asked to do there's no precedent for this.
I don't know if I would call it unique. I think in a lot of instances, there's probably a zoning applied to portions of the city that make a property non-conforming.
Sure.
To anticipate growth and those kinds of things. So, technically that's all this would be doing is making that residential use a non-conforming use, but a protected non-conforming use with grandfather rights to remain there as long as they wanted to in perpetuity. So I don't know if I would call it unique to our city or that's.
Steve, I would just say, I think that the uniqueness in this one is that we, most of our property that's been zoned commercial and then developed has all been bare land. To have something that has been a residential use and now changing that zoning designation or at least our general map going the other way. Right, I think that's what's unique in this one, but I've seen that, I would say that I've seen that is not unique, obviously, in many other areas of the county as they've went through, I guess you could call it redevelopment type processes where a piece of residential, even in Riverton, I know in my time working down there, seen a lot of those where residential uses were changed over to commercial uses and they stayed until that such time they found a commercial use to come in, and then that house was torn down and they moved forward.
How long could that non-conforming use, would it only apply to the current resident, and if they were to sell it, could another resident move in there?
It can remain there as long
perpetuity.
as.
So they can expand, they can maintain that legal non-conforming use, they simply can't expand on that residential use. So they couldn't come in and put in an accessory unit or change any of the footprint of that building without complying with the underlying zoning.
Okay. And so the Aleros family is wanting to stay there. They, at least from what has been written here, is that they are intending to stay there. They understand what's happening and they're okay with that commercial development around their house, potentially a car wash right next to their house. They understand that and they're okay with that.
From my understanding, that is the case. They are here it looks like you've been making eye contact with them. They're here if you'd like them to speak.
I think I would like to hear that, just on the record, that they do understand that could potentially put a lot of traffic, at least, and not saying this is the right site plan, but if this site plan were adopted at a future place, we're putting a car wash right next to their home, could have lots of noise, overspray, things like that. I just want to make sure that they're articulating an acceptance of that potential outcome, that there's a full comprehension of what this means.
Can I ask a favor real fast first? Will you just tell me, are we on 9.4? Just so I can.
9.5.
9.5. So we already, okay, wrong, okay, 7,300, okay, 9.5. And then also in addition to that, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but just because I just came from a tax hearing where some property owners had a whole bunch of development all around their residential home because that area got rezoned to commercial. And now they are paying commercial rates for their property taxes because they live in a residential home, but now they're rated at a commercial rate. Does that apply?
I don't know the answer to that. That sounds correct, but that's an assessor question, really. I don't know the answer to that.
Just to understand
Potentially.
that that's a possibility.
Yeah. And Councilman Shields, just as part of the rezone application that came through, just in terms of, having a car wash adjacent, one of the conditions of a recommendation from the Planning Commission was not to allow a car wash to be one of the uses on that property. Allow a gas station without a car wash, but.
I would tend to do that too. I think I'm okay with the exception, you know what I mean? But I just want the people that are living there and going to be residing there understanding what the potential impacts are.
Sure.
And this tax question I hadn't even considered, so that's another impact. I guess I would look for a confirmation or something in writing.
So they have.
In a public statement that would say, yes, we understand, we're completely on board, that kind of a thing, so.
So as part of the application, they did sign a waiver to authorize it. Got your name? Steve. Sorry? Steve Tobias. Oh, yeah. Steve Tobias to be the legal representative on this.
From Keller Williams, I saw that on that stuff, okay. And, okay.
Nate, can I address the tax question? So
Yeah, yeah.
Alan and I were just chatting about that. So property taxes are just assessed at whatever the value of the property is. The valuation of that property might change based upon the use of it, right? So if it's designated commercial and used for a commercial purpose, that could potentially alter the assessed value, but the property tax is the same regardless of the use. Did that clarify that? So it could ultimately change the value of the property up or down, depending upon the
mill
zoning.
levy is the same,
But the
but the
rate that is assessed is the same.
But the value of the property could substantially increase based on a commercial designation
Correct.
versus a residential.
Just being new here, but I believe commercial property, residential property is, the assessed value is a % of the real market value, and commercial, it's 100% of the real market value, correct?
If it's a personal residence, it's taxed at 55% of actual value. If it's non-primary residence, then it's 100%. So, but that doesn't take into consideration at all whether it's commercial or not.
Right.
It's just whether it's your primary residence.
Yeah.
Nice, okay.
So the value that's determined by use is more, what it is, because the rate doesn't change. But if you're still in your primary residence, doesn't matter what's next to you as far as the rate goes and the rate you pay. What would make the difference is if the county, when they assess it, assess you at a higher value because you're sitting next to commercial.
Right.
Gotcha.
Then I would just leave my question at this. Are you satisfied that the residential owners there are in understanding and agreement with this process? Or with this potential change?
Yeah, I think with the documentation that we have, and in the Planning Commission meeting as well, they were aware of what was taking place.
Can you guys give me a thumbs up on that too? That they understand and they're okay with it? Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Let the record show they gave a thumbs up.
Any additional?
The record show they gave a thumbs up.
There were multiple thumbs.
Yes.
Yeah, there were multiple thumbs,
There were.
right.
Okay, any additional questions on this item right now for Clint? It's very weird calling somebody by the name I have. Do you actually prefer Clint or Clinton?
Either way, I'll take Spencer too, so.
Okay.
However you want to go.
I'll just say that based on, again, obviously current general plan and then what we've anticipated working through the updated general plan process, and knowing that the dynamics of that particular intersection are going to continue to change pretty dramatically over time with the increase of traffic and these things, obviously I believe that long-term a commercial designation of some sort is most appropriate in that area. And, obviously it'll be up to the residents that are there, how long they put up with all of those things, down the road as those things continue to change. But again, generally, for me speaking, I'm in agreement that the general plan amendment is appropriate for this particular area.
And I didn't actually read the entire ordinance, but does does it contain the planning commission's recommendations, or do we need to add that to our motion?
So for the general plan amendment, there was no recommendations from the planning commission.
Just on the zone.
Those zoning
Get on the
conditions.
zoning
Those are
map,
in the,
okay.
yeah,
I'm
the next
just-
action.
I know
You're getting
it's gonna
ahead.
be the same thing, I'm just asking, so.
Yeah.
So the zoning map amendment ordinance, does it include the recommendations from the planning commission in the ordinance?
Yes, it will.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
Yeah. So I would just say that it is nice if these things come in with a plan that says, hey, these businesses or those types of things, we're ready to roll forward on this. We need to change this and move on this. But I am personally usually never opposed to preservation of commercial because I think our job is to look further down the road. And I think even if it's not in the next 5 years, it will be in the next 10 years that there'll need to be some commercial designation to provide some relief or services to people in that area. So that would be
The Dancy Hidden Oaks and all that
yeah
stuff. over there,
my
yeah.
comments for commercial. I definitely think that we have to be careful about some conditions, zoning conditions, because there are certain things that wouldn't be appropriate there, but that would be allowed in that zone. But as far as designating it and preserving it, I wouldn't be opposed to that.
Okay. Sounded like one of those two was really close to a motion. Jared, any comments from you?
I'd express the same general desire, right, to change that to commercial. It's definitely going to be viable there. I absolutely hate and I know it's a strong word, but hate the idea of having a residential unit in the middle of it in perpetuity. I think that is really poor planning. So I mean, my preference would be to follow what the current general plan is and leave that residents out, and they can come back and get that rezoned later.
Was that anything that was, I guess, discussed during this application process?
No, and no, not in the planning commission discussions, no.
Because the current general plan, if you show that that map again,
It's only the
right,
the top half of it, yeah.
basically deliberately avoids that residence. And I'm not saying I'm not opposed to making that residence commercial at some point, but given the somewhat of a plan there, I think it just spells trouble. The layout's bad, the use is bad. It can be good down the road, but I mean, as Spencer mentioned, in many other cities, you see these little carve-outs where there's a little house in the middle of a commercial or an industrial area, and it just is not a good fit.
And to the point, preserving the residential nature of a residential property allows them to use it fully as a residential property, to modify it, to upgrade it, to put an ADU, to do any of that stuff that they wanted if they wanted to stay there.
And if they want to sell it, to an I'm just going to throw names out there, an Allstate agent to make that house office, right?
Yeah.
Well, they can apply for that rezone at that time when it's next to a built-out gas station. But to just have that as really an island, if you look at that, I mean, everything around it would be commercial, a parking lot behind it, et cetera. Like, it just doesn't fit.
Well, I don't disagree with that point. I don't like the house being there either, but I do, as far as a general plan, like the idea of that being commercial, that whole area.
Yeah, I think there's two quick, like, the general plan I'm okay with, but to Jared's point, I think that
the actual zoning amendment.
I might be persuaded to leave that part out of the zoning amendment.
Okay, any other questions?
No, no, but I'll make a motion.
Okay.
Yeah, it's your turn.
9.5. I've been making motions all night long. Let's see, make a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-20, approving a general plan amendment for 1.7 acres of property located at 6387 West, 13100 South, from low-density residential to C2 commercial.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion by Sherry and a second by Steve. We will do a roll call. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well, so that motion carries unanimously. So we'll move on to item 9.6, which is now the discussion and consideration of an ordinance granting the proposed zoning map amendment request from Jeannette King for 1.7 acres located at 6387 West, 13100 South, from A.25 agricultural to C2 commercial. Mr. Spencer.
Okay, so in the interest of redundancy, I'm going to skip through a lot of this that you've seen and kind of get to the meat of the matter. Let's see. Okay. So in terms of rezoning the property to a use that would support their desired uses, which would be something along the lines of a gas station with some office space. With the C2 zone, there are some built-in protections for any commercial use or any conflicting use that's adjacent to another use. There's a requirement in the ordinance that the applicant install a 6-foot masonry wall. For this property, if it was rezoned to C2, there would be a 15-foot setback from that property line to, it's a landscape setback, so it would be completely landscaped, no parking stalls would be allowed in that. And then there would be evergreen trees planted 20 feet on center, and that would be anywhere where it's adjacent to a commercial, residential zone.
So all along the back fence also, there's that.
Yeah, right. And then in addition to that, there is a conditional use process. So if there was an application that came in that would impose impacts to the adjacent residential neighborhood, those impacts could be mitigated through a conditional use process to make sure that any kinds of impacts would be handled and dealt with and considered as part of the approval process. So additional things, additional landscaping could be a requirement, or street lights, or I don't think it can't regulate use, but it could regulate the design of the site so it's more in character with the surrounding neighborhood. In terms of consideration, the proposed uses, these are from the Planning Commission, would be animal care, banks, financial, professional office, a medical or dental office, a convenience store, which would allow the gas station, and then a daycare, professional services, and general retail. And then it did not include a car wash, so no car washes would be permitted on that, within that property. That's just in terms of a zoning condition.
So with a general retail, they came in with their general retail product they want to put in there. They still have to go through a process of the conditional use process to make sure that any negative impact it would have on the neighborhood would be mitigated. Is that what you said?
Right, so that would only apply, I guess, if the property was over 1 acre. So if the site planning, if the parcel that they were coming in on was over 1 acre, I guess it could apply different ways. But if it's over 1 acre, it automatically goes to a conditional use permit process. Or if the use is designated in the land use table as a conditional use, then it would also go. Convenience stores, I'm certain would go. I'm not sure what else from this list here, what else would be considered a conditional use. But we could gather that information.
Cool, thank you.
Can you go back a couple of slides to the picture that has that piece kind of unshaded, the residential piece? There. That's what I'm in favor of.
Is that like the line is right next to the side of the house? Is that right? Does it have to be a certain setback as far as see the north line?
I don't I'd like to get specific about, you know, what is the residential lot separate from this whole lot, or is this whole one thing? I'm just not sure how the plot looks right now.
Yeah, are they each different tax notices? Are they each different
Yes,
parcels?
2 separate parcels.
Okay, so that is one parcel, and then everything else is another parcel? There's only 2 parcels?
Right.
Then I would be in favor of doing the rezone C2 on the big parcel, but not the residential parcel at this time.
And then they would have to come out when they're ready to use it as a commercial property and have it rezoned.
I just feel like if it's going to be residential use, let's keep it residential for the time being.
And that would put, and this is neither here nor there, but just by way of information, if that were the case, that this little piece was cut out, then there would be that requirement, a 15-foot landscape setback, if any type of commercial development took place here. So that would probably restrict what took place on that southern part, the southern portion of that property. Is my, so I mean, if you've got 15 feet on that one side and 15 feet on the other, you know, you've got 30 feet that's eaten up by landscaping, then you don't have much to work with.
Which would encourage anybody that wants to develop it to approach the residential, to have it be included in it, to not have that little island in it.
I would
right?
imagine so.
Additional thing to think about is if it does go commercial, that'll require them to put a precast wall all the way around that residence.
That little house.
Around that residence, yep.
Will kind of inhibit commercial development around that.
I don't want to make it worse for me, but the reason we have these in our ordinances is to make sure that there's a buffer between a residential property and commercial property. And those really are incompatible uses, and I wouldn't want, you know, the residents there to be disturbed by commercial traffic or, you know, patrons or anything like that. That if it's their residence and it's their home, I'd want it to be preserved as their home and protected from that commercial activity. That's kind of been my concern with the whole thing here.
Jared, I believe you had a comment.
Yeah, if I could, I totally agree with that point, Steve. And more so, I'd say realistically, I mean, from a commercial point of view, you're going to sell the north half, right, and build something there. And really, there's not much left on the bottom for anyone to do unless they buy that house and turn it into one.
Yep.
So I don't understand why. I don't understand why the owner would even want to zone that as commercial and potentially pay much higher property taxes on that area, right? Later down the road, if they wanted to rezone that whole southern half of it to commercial, make it an office building and put in parking, whatever, like that, you can absolutely do that later. But if you zone it this way now and they sell off the north part, there's nothing left on the bottom for anybody else to come in and do unless they're going to use the house.
Or tear it down.
So,
yeah.
So again, Steve asked the question, and I think I understand, but I want to make sure I do. There's two lots here that comprise this total proposal. Is that correct?
2 parcels, I guess. Is that the
Yeah,
correct
2
term?
parcels. And what exactly are those? Okay, so is that one right there? So it is just that small square that's cut out, is that second parcel?
So we have a few different residents on one parcel of property. Is that what you're saying? Because there's more than one living. There's more than one residence.
There's a mobile home on that one side too, on the south side.
Yeah, that could be the case. That is likely occurred as, you know, before Harriman was a city.
Okay, well, it was in the county.
Just kind of grandfathered condition.
That'd be one of those in perpetuity things.
Yeah.
Yep.
Sure. Grandfathered in.
2 things. One, you've got someone raising their hand. That's obviously for the mayor pro tem to call on them. But the second thing would be, right, our last item just redesignated this under the general plan, all of it to commercial, right? It does have an existing zone of residential, but maintaining it as residential would not be in line with the general plan amendment that you just undertook. One thing to consider is that even a legal non-conforming use would maintain the residential character of that. It would not impose the same requirements of putting in a precast wall and breaking up those incompatible uses. But like I mentioned earlier, anytime that were to change, that would require the property to be brought up into compliance with the C2 zone. So if they wanted to tear anything down, if they wanted to come in for a conditional use, they couldn't, right? So it does maintain a portion of that residential character, even if it remains a residence, because it is a legal non-conforming use, but it
would
couldn't be
not
changed.
require the buffer walls, the precast walls, the offsets, the 15-foot setbacks, none of that stuff.
It would not require that.
If it was all zone.
If it was all zone C2. Correct, Clinton?
Yes. Okay.
But if we didn't zone it commercial, we would be out of compliance with our own general plan amendment we just made.
We just made.
Kind of. I kind of have to take issue with that, Chase, because they've stated the intention to continue using it as residential.
And that's a fair point. And I guess the only caveat I would add is that your general plan amendment would anticipate any rezones be commercial, right?
Yes.
It's currently designated as residential. And we have areas that are currently zoned one way that don't comply necessarily with an update or an amendment to the general plan.
Right.
So that's not, to your point, Jared, you're absolutely right. That's not incompatible with what we've done in the past.
Just means if they're going to change the use on it at some point, it has to go commercial.
Yes.
Right.
Okay.
Any type of demolition or any change to the property would have to comply with the current city
And it
ordinances.
changes it. Okay. I believe we have a gentleman that wants to make a comment. Is the council okay if we allow the gentleman representing the
I think
family
it's
to come and make
appropriate
a
at this
comment?
time.
Come on up, sir.
The applicant?
Was it Mr. Tobias? Is that correct? If you will, just state your name for the record, please.
Yeah, I'm Steve Tobias with KW Commercial, and I represent the Alvarez family and the Cordova Trust. I specifically...
Sorry, can I just ask you, because our thing says from Jeannette King, so who's representing that
Yeah,
individual?
well, Jeannette King is part of the Cordova Family Trust.
Okay, so she is the individual from the trust?
Yes.
Okay.
So the Cordova Trust owns the bigger 1.5 acres that wraps around the Alvarez property. That's 0.18 acres. And the Alvarez family has signed applications into your city asking for the commercial rezone. They're fully aware of the development. And I have specifically addressed with the tax assessor, they can file a residential exemption and maintain the residential property tax valuation until it's changed its use to a commercial. So there's
Not
no
zoned
impact to them
use.
if we rezone it tonight to commercial as far as taxes, which I'm
That's
glad you
good,
brought it
because
up.
that's exactly what I told the lady at the last meeting. I think you can go into that equalization and get that changed.
We're also in agreement with, the Planning Commission had suggested that some uses in the C2 zone were not appropriate for this particular scenario, and we were in agreement with that, excluding the car wash, and, alcoholic beverage sales, that type of thing. So we're totally fine with what the Planning Commission had recommended to you. We did want the C2 zone because we wanted to have an opportunity to provide the neighborhood dentist or doctor or veterinarian that a C1 zone would exclude. And so, and my point in providing the two plans was to show you that we can overlap into the Alvarez property very easily, a nice 2,100 square foot medical building, just like we have in the southeast corner of that plan. But we're not specifically saying we want to go for a convenience store. That's just a concept. The main idea is there may be an ultimate buyer that Zion's Bank maybe wants this corner that would change the complexion of, we're just presenting an idea that, you know, within the zone, there's multiple uses that could come in. And that's what we're looking for, to help the family achieve their highest and best use. They've wanted to sell this property for years. And this allows them to get the highest and best use for the property. And Alvarez's are totally in compliance. They want to stay there. They want to continue living there, but they understand what's going on around them. And you have signed applications to that effect.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I guess that's the hard part is, if the landowners are requesting something and it's within scope of our general plan, and even if I'm not necessarily thinking it's a great idea, do I have a right as a city council to say?
To tell them no.
Tell them no?
Yeah.
Right? When it's
That's a good question. Additional thoughts from other members of the council?
I'll just make one more comment. It might even be a question for the representative that just spoke. Normally with these sorts of things, at least in my experience on the council, they have shopped it out to different users, and there would be an end user that is interested and has plans and brings it to us, requesting that rezone at the same time of their application, so the property owner still gets the highest value out of it, and we have some certainty as to what it's going to be. It sounds like that hasn't.
Sir, so the question is it doesn't sound like from what you just said, there is not currently an interested party on what they want to develop there.
Correct. We've not started marketing anything until we achieve the zoning.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's.
You're really wanting the zoning in place to be able to go out and market it as such.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, thank you. Answer your question, Jared?
Yep, just wanted to make sure that that was the case.
Okay.
No, I 100% agree with the concerns with this. I agree. I don't like, because you can drive all over the valley and see kind of messes like that. My assumption, which kind of broken out is not a very good acronym, tends to be that that residential home will no longer exist if they shop the commercial property, because they'll
want
come
the
in
whole
and
piece.
do the whole
thing,
piece.
yeah.
And I assume that the residents living in that understand that and understand that possibility and must be okay with that if they're requesting it to be rezoned also, because they in addition, both parcels want to be rezoned, correct? Both landowners?
Yep, sounds like that's a fair statement.
I think he's gonna make, it has a potential to really negatively impact the residential
It does.
lives, but not my responsibility if they request that, right?
Yeah, and I do believe that there should be zoning conditions on it, not for this particular resident, because this particular resident's here asking for that, but the residents behind that to the other side need to be protected, and it would be their residential impacts that I would be most concerned about, because these residents are here understanding the impact they're asking to be dealt with. But the ones behind that, we just need to make sure that we do a good job of making sure what gets developed there is compatible with neighborhood use, so that those people are very minimally impacted by that.
I think the Planning Commission did, a good job of trying to address that concern as well.
And I'm just gonna re-verify, redundantly verify again here. That this ordinance 2021-21 does include the zoning conditions that the Planning Commission recommended.
Clint, that's correct, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, would anyone be willing to make a motion?
Reluctantly, I will make a motion to approve ordinance number 2021-21, authorizing a zoning map amendment for 1.7 acres of property located at 6387 West, 13100 South, from A.25 agricultural to C2 commercial.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve
No, second.
and a second by Sherry. All right, we will call for the vote on this. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Jared?
Very reluctant, yes.
I'm with him.
And I will vote yes as well, so that motion does carry unanimously. All right, we will move on to item 9.7 on our agenda. This is discussion and consideration of an ordinance to amend the Hermann Land Development Code to modify the multifamily design standards in residential and mixed-use zones. Back to you, Mr. Spencer.
Okay, last one, and then you'll be done with me, so. I'm sure you all remember we had a joint meeting with the Planning Commission not too long ago to address some of our concerns with multifamily design standards, what has been currently taking place and what should take place in the city. And so this ordinance is to address some of those, kind of the low-hanging fruit of that meeting anyways, and then in a larger and a more prolonged process, looking at some more detailed information that would continue to improve our multifamily ordinance and, and those situations in the city in the long term. So again, we're looking at April as time of application, and then so what we're looking at here is trying to get a better design for multifamily housing, something that is a little more not only architecturally pleasing, but in terms of longevity will be a better product for the city overall and meet some of the standards of the city that are already in place. In terms of the objective from the general plan, the policy is to develop new design standards for residential, industrial, and other uses in the city. The proposal doesn't dictate design, rather it increases standards for building materials and composition to improve overall quality and to avoid design not in character with community. So in a lot of our commercial zones right now, there is a requirement that they provide 60% brick or stone on all elevations of the building, but there's nothing in our multifamily that would require that to happen. Also included in our commercial standards are offsets, depending on the size of the building. And a lot of our multifamily in the city has a lot of real long flat walls that don't have any type of variation or provide any interest from a street view standpoint. In terms of standards for consideration, we're looking at, is this harmonious with the overall character of development? As I mentioned before, so increasing the brick, rock, and stone to 40% for all facades of the building was a recommendation that was put forth by the Planning Commission, requiring standards that were previously only applicable to the RM zone, to the R210, R25, and MU zones. The MU zone, MU2 zones, design standards are typically addressed in an MDA, so that these provisions would only apply to R210, R215, and MU zones. One of the requirements is providing a variation in wall planes at a minimum of 2 feet of setback or 2 feet of variation per 25 linear feet of building. Again, that's to provide for a little more differentiation in a wall plane, something that breaks it up, makes it a little more interesting from a street standpoint. And requiring additional building types for developments as they get larger. So in a lot of these areas that you see, there's one building type for a very large parcel. What this provision would require them to have different types of buildings depending on the size of the property. So you could have maybe a large apartment complex as part of it, and then smaller townhomes or a garden type of development, but something that breaks that up so you don't get the monotonous type of development that we've seen in the past.
So not architectural styles, but actual different designations of
different building
units.
types. Yep. In terms of effect on property, it increases the design characteristics in the city. And then in terms of adequate services, these are the types of things that would be addressed at a site plan or conditional use process. So the building types, as I mentioned, these would be things that, as a development gets larger, there are more building types that are required. So the building types that we'd be looking at are garden types, which would be these brownstone, cottage, grand home, something along those lines. Stacked units, which are owner occupied, townhomes, and then apartments. Townhomes are basically stacked units that are just rentals, right? So in terms of the design standards, again, getting back to the original recommendation from staff was to have 40% brick and stone for sides that faced a public right-of-way, but as that went to the Planning Commission, they wanted to see that requirement all the way around the entire building. Again, going over, I think we've seen a lot of this information already. So, as I mentioned, so the Planning Commission did review this. They voted unanimously to recommend approval for this text amendment. Again, increasing the brick or stone requirement for 40% of all building elevations and precast materials being used for all transitions between window sills and lintels. If there's any questions on that one, I'd be glad to entertain what I can.
Thanks for the report. Any questions for Clint on this item? Again, we've had the opportunity to have a lot of discussion on this in a previous combined work meeting with the Planning Commission, and I think there was a lot of very good ideas shared at that time, and certainly a lot of opinions expressed on wanting to see some of these things. And obviously, I think most of what I can recall from that meeting has been incorporated certainly into what's before us tonight, and with a recommendation from the Planning Commission. So, any additional questions from other members of the council?
No, other than the same things I talked about before, was the brick or stone requirement. I still am really not a big fan of brick or stone. I think that there's a lot of different types of building materials that we eliminate that can create a lot of variety in aesthetics by just saying you have to have brick or stone.
And that would only be for 40% of the building. The rest of it could be, a list of alternative methods.
Right, but we've talked about like
products.
I forget, they call them kind of the country style. What do you call that?
Like a hardy board?
Yeah, just different things like that, where you see different, different variations of things that are aesthetically pleasing to some people, and some people maybe like brick or stone, but we're eliminating those possibilities in our community by saying that, it has to be brick or stone. 40% of it has to be brick or stone. So I have a little bit of heartburn over that. And the other thing I have a little bit of heartburn over is part of the reason that has been discussed for doing this is to try and slow down this mass desire to just do multifamily in our community, and to say, look, yeah, but if you're going to bring multifamily, it has to be a higher standard, so that we promote really nice multifamily, so we don't see the deterioration of that over a shorter period of time. That would be my interpretation of what's been discussed. But if we're not going to make these types of things apply in our MDAs that we're creating, then what's the purpose? Because all we're doing is penalizing somebody with 2 acres that maybe wants to build something on a small piece of ground. They're going to have to live up to the 40%, but the large developers who come in and build most of these housing types that we're talking about this will never impact them.
And I appreciate that sentiment. That's something I've thought about as well. And as I've thought about it, generally when you do an MDA, you're doing something, you're getting something for giving something, right? Mm-hmm. So you'd expect something that's above the standard. So by establishing these standards of having 40% brick or stone, I think you could say, in future MDAs, well, we have a standard that 40% brick and stone on all of our multifamily, but we're not getting that. We're not getting our standard, or even higher than our standard in this MDA that's even, in the general this applies generally throughout the city. So I think that this would increase that standard and hold developers in the future, for future MDAs, to a higher standard of development.
That would be my hope. The problem is sometimes this body doesn't go there. But we would have to just would have to be a challenge to ourselves that this is our standard. So any deviation from that standard we have to see a real benefit to the city to deviate from this standard in any MDA. Otherwise, our traditional codes should apply.
Sure.
Anyway, that's my concern.
I totally agree with that, Sherry. I mean, if we're going through putting these ordinances in place and design standards, and then we routinely ignore them, what's the point?
Mm-hmm.
So for any of these MDAs, and to me, that's why we'll be discussing that in a little bit with the MDA policy. That should be part of our MDA policy, is that all of our ordinances and design guidelines apply.
Have we had any multifamily construction in the city that's not a part of an MDA?
Not recently that I can think of.
Yeah, I think the Harriman project was not part of an MDA.
Yep.
And I think there may be a couple of others, but generally, and on top of that, the last, I think, 3 or 4 MDAs that have been done do require the current standard. It's just the older MDAs that were done many years ago, that the 2 that I can think of are Wasatch and Rosecrest, that do hold old standards.
Anyway, those are just my concerns.
To Sherry's previous comment about, if somebody wants to come in and ask for a deviation from this standard because they have a different, I guess, architectural design concept that doesn't incorporate brick or stone, is there a process for someone to come in and ask for a deviation from the standard if they really wanted to try and get something different than what is required in there on the 40% brick or stone?
That's a good point. That's not something that we've considered as part of the process thus far, but that's something that could be built in, is a provision that any alteration to these requirements would need Planning Commission approval. And I think that we'd probably want to establish some kind of standard. So if they're going to deviate from the standards, they'd have to still comply with, standard X, Y, and Z still, or something along those lines.
Because, I mean, to Sherry's point, there's, I'm not an architect or a designer for a reason, because that's not my skill set, but there may be something out there that, again, we're not aware of or considering right now that may have an incredible look to it that doesn't meet this, that, again, may be appealing
Good point. I was just up
to some, yeah.
in the Northwest a week or so ago, and I saw this new development, and it was concrete and wood. It was gorgeous. It was really cool, like ultra modern looking, like very neat. I would love to see multifamily look like that. I mean, that would be amazing, but that's not what this is. So
Yeah, I just want to make sure that we address that, because sometimes we just get locked into this thing, oh, it has to have brick or stone, and it's like, but there can be some other designs out there that can be very nice. That I don't think that we should limit ourselves on allowing that type of stuff into our community, because it creates variation. It creates, if all you do is drive around, yep, everything's that same brick and stone, but or else you see, oh wow, that's different. I don't want to be a bunch of Cracker Jack boxes.
Right, and I don't know that just requiring the brick and stone element. I think you can go around the country and see a lot of brick and stone, and one building can be very different from another. And I can see this as 2 different ways, in terms of building a sense of place. If Harriman is per se, brick city, then when people come here and they see these brick buildings, they'll be like, oh, I'm in Harriman. They'll know that, and then there is some value to having a sense of place and understanding where you're at. But at the same time, maybe there's a unique building design that comes in that, that promotes Harriman, and people could see that and say, oh, this really cool building was in Harriman. So there's a couple different sides to that. And I think as we wrote this ordinance, from our conversation from that original meeting, it sounded like the community values were to promote that brick and stone look throughout the community. but we could certainly entertain, if there's an appetite to include additional materials, that's something that we could also look at.
So anyone can come in and just request an exception to the land development code, right? Can they do that or not? I mean,
No, that's only by variance, so, which would this, a variance in this regard would be a self-imposed hardship, which wouldn't be applicable. But if you wanted that to be built into the ordinance, we could bring something back to you that would allow that to happen. If somebody wanted to deviate from the brick and stone requirement.
I think I would be, look, I understand what this is about, and I'm supportive of the direction this is going 100%. But I do agree that I think there's twofold to this. Number one is to preserve what we would call, quality aesthetics of multifamily throughout the city, as opposed to some things that we have felt are really aesthetically not pleasing. And then I think there's another part of this to make it almost a little more expensive, right? To discourage some of this development in favor of other kinds of development that might be less stringent or a little easier, less expensive to do. And so with both of those in mind, I don't want to make an exception to that automatically, but I think that there should be some kind of a clause or a caveat that would allow people with, a really compelling design aesthetic or, new materials or something like that to request an exception to this.
Yeah, as long as those standards exceed what our minimum standards are this, but if you can bring something that would show the quality of your product would exceed what our minimum requirements are, then we would be willing to consider that.
And that's something I
Maybe.
think that,
Go ahead, Jared.
Sorry, maybe it's just my longer experience on the council. I haven't gone through many of these conversations so far. That's kind of what this process is for, right? So if we had a big development come in and they want to build a really nice looking building with glass and other stuff, then they could approach us and say, we need you to adjust your ordinance for us. But my experience so far has traditionally been that that's not the case. These guys come in and build whatever is quickest and fastest and cheapest. And it's been an aesthetic issue, but also a durability of the material issue, right? So we end up with a lot of stucco and a lot of hardy board and things that do deteriorate over time. And the brick and stone has been a way to help with that durability and have a lasting look and feel. But if there were something big, say with Olympia Hills, I don't know why people don't want to use names, but that's the one we're talking about. Olympia Hills comes in and there are some big apartment buildings in there and they have a really great idea. We can adjust some of this stuff, but I wouldn't want to build in an exception. This is my thing on exceptions, right? Everybody has an exception.
Everybody wants an exception. Yeah.
You open that door and every one of them will come in and want to do something that's cheaper.
So Jared, just to make sure I'm understanding where you're at, you would be more in favor of having somebody that wanted to change something petitioning to make it a change to the ordinance rather than putting language in there that would allow them to just come and ask for an exception. Is that accurate?
Correct. Because
Okay.
I just, in my experience at least, there haven't been many of those. I mean, the one variance that built into the commercial ordinance was if the building were over a certain square footage, right? Then they could ask for an exception to the brick and stone percentage on commercial buildings. If you wanted to do something like that, if it was over a certain percentage and it would have to, for me, the commercial stuff is for them to save money, right? It's not an aesthetic thing for them. But when it comes to housing, it always is, and that to me is counterproductive to what we're trying to do with this.
Can I ask what that process for requesting a variance would be, or petitioning for an amendment? I mean, how would somebody go about that?
Ordinance, because right now you can't request a variance on the way this
They'd have to come and petition us to.
So how do they do
the
that?
whole ordinance.
So
They'd
it
have
would
to come
just
in.
be
To modify the ordinance, is that what it is a petition to modify the ordinance?
Oh, yeah. So you can do it one of two ways. You could do
They're
it.
modifying the ordinance form.
Say that again, Jared.
For the commercial one that I mentioned, they'd have to meet that minimum square footage, right? And it's just ask the council. And then it still is at our at our discretion. With this, as it's written, if they had to come change the ordinance, it's almost the same thing. You have to come ask the council if they want to change the ordinance. And to me, I really like that, because then you've got to prove that this is something exceptional, right? And go through that process rather than having a built exception clause.
And that petition would come straight to the council. It wouldn't go through a planning commission review or anything, right?
It has to do both.
It would have to go through the planning commission because it's an amendment to our land use code.
To a land use code, okay.
But it's the
And
same-
I'm okay with that then.
But it's the same built-in process. If they want an exception, they have to come through the process for the exception. Or if they want to come and redo the ordinance, they have to go through the
Petition
process.
for the redo,
to-
yeah.
Isn't it
So
the same?
a variance goes to our appeal authority, which is appointed by the council. And for purposes of this city, that's David Church, just one individual who hears a request for a variance. Just to expand on this conversation a little more, a development agreement, which would impose guidelines on top of or in addition to the existing city ordinance, is still required to go through that same process. You still have to have a public hearing with the planning commission, and it's ultimately signed off by the city council. So the procedure is very much the same for the different avenues that you would pursue. An amendment to the city code would change it for all development, right? Which is it cuts both ways. It's good and bad, right? A development agreement is just for the development being considered by that agreement.
But one of the things that, and I keep referring back to my old days in Ogden, but so we went through this a very similar process to this, and as one of the caveats to an exception, so we listed a few standards that people would have to abide by, say that they would have to come back to the Planning Commission for consideration, but the things that Planning Commission would be looking at is maybe in terms of durability. Instead of requiring brick or stone, they could allow like a concrete material or something that still maintains that sense of durability at the base level, or some other kind of caveat. I'd have to go back and look at that ordinance exactly how we wrote it, but I think coming back to the Planning Commission and abiding by some standards that are of concern, if you don't follow the standards, then I think that we could create some elements that people would have to still follow as they sought an exception.
Yeah, I wouldn't want to open the door to exceptions. I think that there'd have to be some very strict language in there that the only way you even qualify for an exception is if you met these, and all of those things have to make it to where that building exceeds what this 40% is. It has to be even more, those types of things.
But there's a point about this is that I think the Planning Commission wants to preserve a feel for the whole city, right? And that they would not necessarily be endorsing for somebody to have polished concrete and glass, and because that's a really different aesthetic, right? It's a really different feel. And so as a Planning Commission trying to create at least a continuity, a feel of the whole broader community, maybe that isn't the most appealing thing. I'm interested in the idea, but maybe that doesn't fit in Harriman,
Yeah, I guess except for if you drive around Harriman,
everything looks different,
everything looks different. It's not, our whole city isn't 60% brick or stone. Some of the newer stuff is, but we have a lot of places in our city that's not like that.
Well, and I think this is really an effort to try and change that.
But the only way,
preserve that look and feel.
But you would never change it because those houses still exist.
No, I agree with you.
To the new areas, you would say that.
Change it
but you
moving
can do that
forward,
in
yeah.
the MDA and say we want everything in this area to be brick. I don't know. That's just my feeling.
Yeah.
But I understand that desire, but it just seems like you'd had to start with the brick or stone
I'm telling you that
22 years ago.
the polished concrete with like the glass and the like cedar wood stuff, it was, man, awesome.
Concrete's a form of stone.
Yeah, it's got some stone in it, right? Anyway, I'm not sure where that leaves us on this, but
yeah, so that's the question is, again, based on the conversation that's had, is there a desire from at least a couple of the councilors to continue this and trying to add some additional language that allows for a process that, or move forward with it as written? And to Jared's point, I think if somebody wants to change it, then they have to petition to do a code change or an ordinance change.
I just tell you where I sit, is I can't support it like it is for the reasons I've mentioned. And so that would be how I would sit, but I'd be, obviously supportive. If you guys feel like this fits how you want it, you can make that motion, but I can't support it. For those reasons, I do believe that this is exactly the direction we want to go as far as increasing those standards. But I do want to have something in there that would allow some variation, but that's, because I like some variation. And if that's not the direction the rest of the council wants, if we want that look and feel of brick and stone, and that's what we want to be noted for, then that's the call you'd have to make. I just like the variation as long as it's high quality that we're requiring.
I just haven't noodled it out enough and haven't heard, enough feedback from the people who really know what's happening with this. So I might be willing to say, could we bring it back at a next meeting with maybe some commentary about some of the things we've asked, right? Like, if the purpose of this is to say, we really don't think an exception is a great idea, and here's why.
Yeah.
Or, yes, we think exceptions could be reasonable. Here's some guidelines we might suggest that would say, if you're going to request an exception, here's some reasons why we might consider it. I'd be open to hearing any of those suggestions we might incorporate into a decision. But before we make a decision, I think I'd like to hear some of that
In a
feedback.
work session, then you want this to come back to a work
I
session?
think it could be on
before-
both. I mean, if the work session's great and we all like it, just prove it. I mean.
Yeah, and I, in addition to that, I would ask even that you look at some different architectural standards, different designs around that say, just like what Steve was talking, look at this building. This is kind of some of the things that the higher end type of design that don't fit into this, but would bring great value to our community.
One of the hard things about some of that, so architecture is very subjective, right? What
Right.
somebody thinks is fantastic, somebody else thinks is terrible.
Right.
It is.
So it's very subjective, and so we would have to come up with some objective regulations in how we looked at things. But we could for sure do that and bring something back to the council.
And maybe look at the other ordinance that you had referred to previously. You
Yes.
talked about it having some things.
So to make sure, we're trying to say, we want to make it more expensive to discourage it. We want it to be more durable. We want it to be more attractive. We want some variety and architecturally appealing stuff all at the same time. So that should be really easy.
You want utopia, right? We'll just bring that.
That's right.
Yeah, and I'm okay for it to be
Feel
on.
very Goldilocks-ish right now,
Ask for the moon.
Jared, you've heard comments from Sherry and Steve. Anything you want to add?
No, I've been trying to get this done for 6 years, so whatever. Like, we had this in the work meeting a couple weeks ago and said, yep, let's get it going. If you guys want to put it back through the ringer again and try to add more to it, I guess we can, but I'd rather move on and get it done and add more things later, like the parking that we discussed, right?
Yeah.
Can we bring it back on the 25th? Is that our next meeting? Could you be prepared to do that in 2
That's
weeks?
I think we could do that.
Is that the next one? I get my dates.
Are you expecting like new language and some of these ideas?
Well, yeah.
Because that's
Of course.
pretty tight.
So in our review processes have changed, so we
Yeah,
may not be able to make the next meeting happen, but the meeting after that.
Yeah, we could probably get the September one. If you want us to spend some time to actually think about this utopia you just described, how we would put that in an ordinance, it's going to take a little bit of time, unless Chase is magic, but I think he's thinking the same thing.
I don't know.
Yeah, the 2 meetings from now.
Yeah.
You guys figured out, I've said my piece. If you want to move forward and pass it.
Well, in the interest of that, I will, I'm actually just going to make a motion myself on this, and we will see what happens. But I will make a motion to approve ordinance number 2020-0 21-22, amending the land use development code to modify the multifamily design standards in residential and mixed-use zones.
I'll second.
Okay. So we have a motion and a second. So call for the roll call. Jared?
Yes.
Steve?
It's okay, you can vote if you want.
No.
Sherry?
Can't, no.
And I will vote yes. So we do not have a majority, so the motion fails. Anyone else like to make a motion?
I just make a motion that we continue this and receive back the requested information at the next meeting possible, which I think would be the first meeting in September. And I would be very comfortable having it just on the general meeting so we can move it along, expedite that, but with some potential language in there that would just allow for very minimal, I'll explain it after, but that would be my motion. Does that make sense?
Okay, so we have a motion from Sherry to continue for some potential additional language.
I would second that.
And a second by Steve. So we will call for the vote on this. Sherry?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote no, but that motion does carry. So that will continue. Good discussion. Okay, we'll move on to item 9.8. I'm surprised your knees didn't lock and you passed out up there.
Sorry about that, Clint.
Jeez. All right, item 9.8. This is discussion and consideration of a resolution authorizing the issuance and sale of not more than $11,500,000 aggregate principal amount of sales and franchise tax revenue bonds and related matters. Alan.
Hello, I'm back.
Hello.
So we were granted this at this last legislature, $800,000 a year for 15 years. And Jonathan, you have my PowerPoint? Okay. When we went to the legislature, these were the priorities that were taken to them, were these 6 projects. And you'd see that they amount to far more than what we would be proposing by this bond. In fact, we'd probably only get the first one. This map is the one that shows the projects. Number 1 there is most of the money we would take for this. But these are the priorities that were set for the money that the legislature eventually gave us some of, enough to do number 1 on our 6 updates. Now, Jonathan and Bryce are prepared to talk to the priorities and the projects and why these projects. But these are the projects that we're looking at. Now, there are some infrastructure grants coming that this money might actually end up qualifying as the matching part to where we could expand it and get more. But right now, we would essentially be looking to complete project number 1 on this priority list. So again, just as a reminder, this is what it would look like to bond, and this is projections based on the market, which is changing, and it's actually going up a little bit right now, so we're losing a little ground on this. But the projection is that we would sell about 8.9 million in bond par value. We would have a discount of that should actually say premium of $1,675,000. So we would actually get $10,670,000. This is by the projection. So we would have a debt of $8,900,000, but we would get $10,600,000. That would give us $10,500,000 approximately for a construction account, with about 150,000 of issuance costs. It's projected that our true interest cost would be 1.7% over 15 years. So that's what we propose, is that we head down this road, we pass parameters resolution, and begin with our first project and get as far as we can with it.
So I just have two questions. Number one, is the reason those 5 projects are listed because that is what we presented to the legislature as priorities for them to provide funding for?
Well, this is that priority list, but yeah, this is where that started, is in March or
Totally
February.
understand. If they awarded us money for things that we said we wanted money for, I get it.
Right.
Number 2 question is, where do these 5 items fall into our list of other capital projects? Are these high, low, middle?
Hey, would you flick back to the slide that has those out? Yeah, that one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. Well done. And I've got my laptop here just in case there's some additional questions. But so starting with Main Street, right now the way it currently sits, number one, is that you will not actually see them reflected in the transportation impact list with capital projects, because we'd anticipated this come in with the development of Hidden Oaks and they'd be reimbursed that project. Now, we've extended the scope of that project so it didn't just include the piece of Hidden Oaks development to only be the frontage of that project. Anyway, so it's essentially increasing the scope from what the developer was providing to be a more cohesive project, which is the reason for number 1. Now, number 2.
It increased the scope to 10, so an additional 10.8 million increased the cost of an additional $10 million? Or the whole thing is $10.8 million? Because I think it's important for us to understand which part of that we're paying back with impact fees from the developers. So it's not truly a cost of $10.8 million, correct?
That's correct.
So I think that would be important for us to know, because if we're borrowing money for projects, I want to know what that money is going for. So how much of that is truly in addition to what it's going to cost?
Yeah. So there's a little more information to that share, which I can provide right now. So there, in addition to just what the development is providing, there's also landscaping that is in here that represents approximately $1.5 million that goes along the project. Now, depending on if we decide to remove that from the scope, that could also reduce it by about around that amount. Now, the amount that's reimbursable specifically from Hidden Oaks for that project is equal to the capacity increase along that road. So it's not a significant portion of the 10.8. One, because it's shorter than the full length that you see there,
right,
as well as it's only eligible for the portions that increase its capacity.
Do you have a clue, a ballpark about what that would be?
You know what? I have Bryce here with me, but I don't know if we've actually quantified that specific number. Do we, Bryce or Blake, do we have a?
I'm looking it up right now. So
Okay. Okay. Now, and maybe while he's looking that up, we can jump to number 2, 60th West. That does sit on our capital projects list and in our master plan, project number 1-17. That is in the project. That one is, it is similar to Main Street. It is eligible for roadway impacts, again, for the portion only of which we increase capacity. So it's a pretty limited portion that's actually eligible for roadway reimbursement. But we've included, again, on this project, landscaping, improvements behind curb and gutter. That's the assumption. It's the conservative assumption we're making on all these projects. So depending on how we proceed with the project, whether we want residents or developers to participate in the cost behind curb and gutter, as we typically do, that would reduce that number. anyway, so that's speaking for projects 1 and 2. Generally speaking, what I would say is these projects that you see here, beyond that, projects number 3, 4, and 5, you will not see reflected on the actual tentative, or excuse me, the recently adopted budget. And that's mostly because this is a strategic approach. On the capital projects list, there are little bites of funding pieces that we can include as part of our capital prioritization, whereas this funding that we're receiving is a significant amount of money as opposed to what we're able to capture with these smaller projects we normally see on our capital projects. So essentially, we're taking a strategic approach to being able to accomplish both at the same time. But
You mean it's easier to get $100,000 than $11 million?
Correct.
Okay.
So what you'll see reflected currently in the capital projects list, you have a lot of perhaps smaller projects, and then here you're seeing the more large and robust projects. So with the combination of what you see from a legislative priority, perhaps, and with what we have in our capital project, you marry those together and you might get a combination of both types of projects.
Go ahead, Nathan.
Right. So tonight, this is a resolution authorizing us to move forward parameters for the bond. But that's not going to lock us into spending it all on one. That's just a project that the council at some point could choose to do 2, 3, or some other combination of those numbers that equals up to that. They haven't spent. This is just the list that went to the legislature. So tonight you're moving to say, yeah, let's go get the bond. You may desire to think about how you want to spend that money, or if there are opportunities to leverage these funds with some of the other monies that appear to be coming down from the federal government. So there may be some additional opportunities. But tonight, really, you're looking at that bond. And I would suggest if you want to think about the priorities, when we bring it back, would be, there's time to think about that and even share your thoughts with staff prior to all that.
So we'll have opportunity once we secure the bond to actually program the spending of it.
Yeah.
Right. So we could change the scope of some of those projects if we wanted to a little bit.
We will actually have to pass a budget to spend these.
Yeah, okay.
Can I ask one question related to this? Because you brought it up, Nathan. Maybe this is Tammy's, could give us feedback here. Sorry to put you on the spot. Have we heard anything from our lobbyists in reference to the $1.2 trillion package that got approved? And what, if any, of Congressman Owen's recommendation as a project was approved or not?
So the infrastructure bill has been approved, and now they will go through that process of aligning the projects that will be included in that. So we don't have any responses yet on our projects, but we just know that the bill has been approved.
So maybe.
Maybe.
Maybe. You're saying there's a chance.
Definite maybe.
I have the numbers for Main Street, by the way. So the draft IFFP that has not been adopted puts the attributable cost to the 10-year growth at $3.2 million. So that would be the developer's portion that they would be reimbursed for, that we should collect impact fees for. So everything above that is the cost of existing deficiency on that road. So a $10 million project, it's about $7.3 million that the city needs to come up to pay for that isn't impact fee eligible.
So out of that 7.3 though, there's 1.5 million that's landscaping on the other side that we may or may not be responsible for, right?
We are responsible if we want it done.
If we want it done.
And one other thing to keep in mind is if we're putting all that strictly on the Hidden Oaks development, there are 799 approved units in that development. Our current impact fee would raise about $1.7 million. So that cost would have to include developments elsewhere.
Elsewhere.
We need to update our transportation master plan to account for that difference, because that's where the problem has risen from, is that. So
We're about $1.5 million short.
we are currently working on our transportation master plan update, which will then let us update our IFFP and our impact fee analysis. And the last several master development agreements that we have adopted have allowed for an increase. They have to follow the current impact fees. The only one I know that doesn't is the Creek Ridge MDA. It has an aggregate cap. So if one goes up, another one has to go down, so that the aggregate impact
Stays the same.
amount stays the same.
Okay, thank you. Good information. Okay, any other questions for Alan or any other member of staff on item 9.8?
I don't have a question, but a comment. Guys, I'm so frustrated by this. If the failing roads do not get addressed, I don't know what I will do. My head will explode.
Okay,
Yeah,
fair statement.
I agree. I think that the priority needs to be on the failing roads, not the new connecting roads into things that don't even have homes. But the impact that's felt to our current residents is huge, and they need to be addressed.
Well, for me, you can set the roads whatever priority you want, but I think we need to get
We just need the money.
and get moving down the road.
Alan, I'm actually really in agreement with you.
We've got
'cause the
$70 million
interest rates
worth
are
of
so good
roads.
right
Let's
now.
get to 11 and get started.
Yeah,
This is crazy.
absolutely.
Understood.
Would anyone like to entertain a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion to approve Resolution R24-2021, authorizing the issuance and sale of not more than $11,500,000 of aggregate principal amount of sales and franchise tax revenue bonds upon the terms and conditions described in the resolution.
I'll second.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve and a second by Sherry. Call for the vote here. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. That motion carries unanimously.
I would just make it, just a comment at the end that, just to reiterate that we have total control in the future on where that money gets spent.
Yep. Okay, we'll move on to item 9.9 on our agenda. This is discussion and consideration of a resolution approving a master development agreement policy. Chase.
Thank you. So council, this item came before you at the last city council meeting. There was some discussion about creating a policy that directed staff on how to process requests for master development agreements. So that process would establish the procedures for having that flow through staff, through the planning commission, up through the city council, and then additionally what requirements there should be within a development agreement. This item is back on tonight for additional discussion and potential consideration. I'd just like to dive into what that policy really says. So the process we're kind of creating based upon what the requirements of state law require, but also what we imagine the council wanting based upon the discussion from the last meeting. So as I described at the last meeting, we do have an application for a master development agreement that was created by the Planning Commission. However, there are no real procedures in place that dictate where that goes from that point. So under this policy, if you choose to adopt it tonight, a request for a development agreement would be submitted to the Community Development Director using that application. That application would then get forwarded on to me as the city attorney, who would begin drafting that development agreement based upon the acreage, the underlying zoning, as well as the requirements that I'll get to in just a second that the council has talked about as being priorities with regard to development agreements. Once I have drafted that development agreement, it will go on to the Planning Commission, who will hold a public hearing, which they are required to do by state law, and then they will make a recommendation to the city council. The city council can sit down with the applicant at that point, negotiate additional terms and conditions of that agreement, and determine whether to approve or deny that application. So that is the base policy.
Thank you.
For or base procedure outlined in the policy for the processing of an application for a development agreement. Any questions about that procedure before I go on to some of the other requirements
No,
that we've
other
talked
than,
about?
it's state required that it goes to planning commission before we look at it. Is that correct?
It is required that they make a recommendation to you before you take action on it. The order of operations there isn't really spelled out in state law, so you could have an opportunity to negotiate with an applicant prior to a negotiated version going to the planning commission, if that makes sense.
That's my only feeling, is like, it just feels like it's the wrong process, because even the other night, we went through an approval, the planning commission recommended approval, but there was missing sections of the whole document, and so it's like, it feels like before it goes to them to consider, if we're not gonna even, if we're gonna say, no, we don't like that, it seems like a waste of their time to go through something and go through that process, if it's something we're not even gonna consider. Do you know what I'm saying?
No, that's fair, and I guess my response to that would be, we could add additional items to include in the policy, or I think what you're hinting at is plug council into that process earlier to get their feedback before something goes to the planning commission. Is that what?
It just feels to me like it wastes their time if it goes to them and we're like, oh, we wouldn't consider any of this. So it's like, why are we asking them to consider it?
Sure. Yeah, so that current policy application is made to the community development director, goes to the city attorney, and again, this is flexible, right? So long as a hearing is held by the planning commission, that order of operations is pretty flexible.
What do you guys think about?
So I've been thinking about this quite a bit, actually, and I understand with the MDA that we just reviewed that there is an effort to meet a timeline. And so they're trying to pursue multiple tracks and get things done in an appropriate order, and that's why it went to PC before it came to us. In my mind, I still believe that we have established a framework in getting up to this point that I think should be repeated with future MDAs. And that is having the council involved in the development and negotiation of the MDA with more focus on a review of the MDA before it would go to the planning commission in the future. Does that make sense? That I think this new process that we've developed around OH is something that we should continue on with future MDA development. So if an application comes in, I like the work groups that we've created. I like the ability for council to get involved in these discussions and get updates and get into the nitty-gritty of things. But my caveat would be where I think a failure in the current process was that the council didn't have that MDA meeting prior to the planning commission review. And if we were gonna implement that as a procedure, I would want that. So I don't know if that makes sense.
It does, and I guess the only follow-up question I would have is, it sounds like what you're saying is not a working group meeting where you don't have a quorum of council, but where you actually have a quorum of council convened to discuss it prior to it going to the
Right, so
planning
after all the working groups have gotten their pieces together, we're kind of collaborating, a special work group to go through the MDA and discuss about it, I think is appropriate.
I think that's a great addition to that. So other than that, or I should say with that addition, your procedure then would be the application gets made to the community development director. The city attorney drafts the base agreement based upon the requirements of the policy. The city council would then convene a working meeting with a quorum present to negotiate and discuss the terms of that. Whatever comes out of that meeting would then go to planning commission for a hearing and a recommendation, at which point the council would then take it back up again for their final action.
Yeah, because think about it makes sense. If it's a public hearing, our job right here is to represent the public. So if we're sending something to the planning commission to have a public hearing on that we weren't even considered, we're not good with any of that or a big chunks of that or things like that, then it sends a message to the public, well, it's the public hearing, you know what I mean? So I just think that's a better flow.
Okay, perfect.
And I would suggest, depending on the size and scope of the MDA, that before there's a quorum of the council, that there could be working groups with council members assigned before it gets to there.
I think that's scalable depending on the
Yeah,
size.
and because I found real value in that so far. I thought there were really interesting conversations, great information discussed, very valuable nitty-gritty kind of things, big conceptual type of things. I thought those, at least the meetings I've been in, were really valuable. I mean, it was a discussion about an objection to mill rates for PIDs that led to this more creative solution, right? I think we should continue to have those kind of conversations.
A suggestion on that is, I think, to capture, I mean, just like we had the discussion with Clint about, you know, the spectrum and the scope of this, I wonder if it would be easiest to just establish a default within the policy, and then council could say, actually, because this one's so small, we're not going to implement it.
Yeah, I agree.
Rather than flipping that on its head, saying we're not going to unless they ask. If we as staff say, hey, here are our proposed working groups and here's the reason why, council could then override that.
Yeah, I like that better.
Yeah, because I think anything coming in with the MDA is going to be large enough that it
A couple hundred acres
would warrant
at least,
that.
right? Is that what we're saying?
Or the reason we're anticipating it is the detail, right? The level of detail that we want with something, whether it's a commercial development or a residential one. I agree.
And that gives us an opportunity to review the MDA, review the design guidelines as a group, and I like that idea better. So that would be my recommendation.
And I'll just acknowledge the council's efforts in the working groups with the Olympia MDA. One of the things that's been beneficial for me as I draft that is, you know, the feedback that the individual members of the working group can bring back to the council as a whole, right? And provide an additional context to some of those discussions.
If I might, and Chase and I reviewed this before Monday's meeting, but as we bring this back for you to consider, I think we should add a section in there that the MDA needs to specify what a value we are receiving to justify it. I think that I heard that loud and clear the other night. So we can just add that, I think, as a default, that we need to identify, you know, if it's they're providing a more robust park system than we would require, okay, we would spell that out, and hence it justifies us going through this process.
Or it could be a specific amenity, or they could
Correct.
agree to pay for a road, or
We would just
like
spell
any
it
of
out.
those things. Yeah,
Whatever.
have it spelled out, right?
The justification has to be spelled out.
Can I ask just one thing? Is there I haven't read this actual policy, but is there a size requirement? Because you'd brought up large.
No, I'm conflating the master development agreement with the plan or
The next item on
Yeah,
the
the next
agenda.
item, yeah.
Because we have done a master development agreement in the past that was a 2-lot, like 1.5 acres. And I don't know if you want to put a size requirement on it, so we don't have to go through a giant policy for maybe something where we were making it so they couldn't split their lot again in the future, and they signed the MDA. So, I don't know, something to consider, just so we don't put somebody that's just trying to do something little through a giant policy that's going to cost them
Could
more.
staff make a recommendation of what they think that number should be, and we can talk about that?
Yeah, I would say we're obviously with Jace on that language. I think that's a great point. Something that I was thinking about too is there.
5-acre MDA may not be
Right,
need all of that additional work, yeah.
So item 2.3 on the proposed policy identifies the requirements. These have often been discussed as the non-negotiables, right, for council. And I believe I've captured most of those, but obviously we can add or take away from this list depending on the council's appetite here. So I'll just go through each one of those. The first one is that the MDA identify what the total or the maximum number of residential units are in the project. The second item, which is closely related to that, is what the actual density of the project is, what the maximum permitted density is within the project. The third item would be a prohibition of any land being added under the development agreement. Just as a side note, that can always be amended, right? Another council could come in and say, actually, we're going to amend that provision and add additional land, but it can't be done without an amendment. There's no just catch-all where they can just bring land in. The fourth item would be a loss of units anytime a church or school is developed within a residential zone. That would,
Any zone.
Yeah, any zone.
yeah, that's true, and I follow that up in the next item. So a loss of units if a church or school is developed, equivalent to the total acreage times by the maximum density. So the example I gave there was if there's 10 acres that are developed as a school and the maximum density under the agreement is 5 units, the project would lose 50 units. The next item, 2.3.5, any land that is owned for strictly commercial uses may not be developed with any other purposes. One of the things, I did write this in here. I wanted to take this out and get the council's feel on it, but I know in other development agreements we've said we can take away or we can develop residential land within a commercial zone as long as an equivalent donation is made somewhere else as a commercial space within the project. So the Creek Ridge.
I don't remember saying that, but I like that.
So the Creek Ridge development, for example, has a provision that says, hey, you can develop this commercial piece as residential so long as you develop another commercial piece within the project at least equal in size to what you developed as residential.
That's good.
Can I say why I don't like that?
Sure.
I mean, we've dealt with a few developers now who don't do commercial, right? So they'll say, well, we'll give you this piece on the backside that's not on a major transportation corridor that will never develop commercial or isn't as good of a spot for commercial, and eventually you'll have to do something else with it. Like there's a reason to have it in the plan. I wouldn't want to say that we couldn't amend, right? We couldn't agree that we want to amend this and move it somewhere else, but just to have the language that they can just give us an equal amount anywhere.
But this
think is really
this language does say the location of which shall be acceptable to the city council and which is at least equal in amount to the land that was rezoned.
But I think if we just keep it simple, any land that is zoned strictly for commercial uses may not be developed for residential units. Everything else is already implied by the power of the council. Anytime that we want to move it, all they have to do is say, we want to rezone and here's why.
Right.
We don't think this is good, we want you to change it here. And so that sitting council at that point can just rezone it, right?
And that's
So it
one of the
just
reasons.
simplifies that.
That's exactly right. I think one of the reasons I wanted to leave it off and get the council's feel for it was just to see if we would rather go through an amendment process to do that or have that default language written in subject to council's final approval. I know which one the developer would prefer, right? But and I think you can create it such that it doesn't bog down the process for them, but still gives the council the final decision. So.
Right, and that's kind of the issue for me, again, just from experience. If it's in there, it's implied that they can do it, right? Like there's a different standard there. Whereas if it's not, then we really have to come to the table on equal footing.
Right.
I think there's a good point to be made there, right? Is that one says, well, we're offering you land, your agreement says you should do this, versus they have to come in and make a persuasive argument to the council as a whole to agree to it. So I would agree with that.
And not just the council, but the public as well. You know
Right.
what I mean? They have to go through that public process that anybody that's even considering living out in that
Right.
development would know that, hey, they're considering moving this.
Right.
I don't know.
So
And
take that language out. Is that the
I think
Yeah.
just shorten it.
consensus I'm
say-
hearing?
Just unless the property is rezoned by approval of the council.
Okay. The next item is, I'm sorry, go ahead, Jared.
I just had two questions on 4 and 5. And this is just a general question on 4. Is just the general term church and school sufficient? Does it need to be a broader term? I've just been through this so many times. Does it need to be religious institution, educational, something sort of?
It's not a school, it's an after-school
Right.
thing.
Yeah, we would define that term in the development agreement, right? And I can shore up that language in this policy as well. But your point's well taken, Jared, that someone might come in and state this,
And then on
It's
5.
not a church, it's a rock band.
Right. Yeah, 5.
Right. So, and then on 5, my only question, other than that, what we just discussed, is saying strictly commercial uses. I'm saying I actually think we want to be broader than just commercial, including industrial, et cetera,
yeah.
right? Where we have
Jobs.
employment centers in.
Commercial employment,
We say-
resident, retail.
Yeah, especially.
Anything other than residential.
Yeah, so that would be.
That would be I was just gonna say, do the inverse of that. Say
Yeah.
anything that's not
It's
zoned
easier to capture
residential.
it that
It
way.
is, yeah, that's a
Anything
good
that's not
point.
residential.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Right.
We do have, we have mixed use zones that allow for multifamily development, I believe. Yeah,
If it,
MU2
anything not
allows for-
residential, we don't want
right.
to be anything. We don't want any residential.
I understand
you.
the intent of the council though there. Yeah, I can change that. Yeah. Item 2.3.6 is just a master plan showing the proposed zoning, the location of the major infrastructure, and the location and the general location and size of the open space.
Yes. Big purple blob is not sufficient.
Right. 2.3.7, development standards that include those items we're typically used to seeing: building height, massing, orientation, common and private open space, natural resource protection, architectural design materials, landscape and buffering standards, parking and signage. And again, this is just the policy directing staff what to look for. The final terms would obviously be negotiated by the council.
The things that have to be included.
Right, right. And then item 8 would be the length of the term of the agreement, and number 9 would be a process for administering, enforcing, modifying, or amending the agreement. And then the last item would, again, just be anything that the council
Anything else additional
wants us
we
to
want in
include.
there?
Yep.
If I might just add a commentary on 238, is that we would generally prefer the length of the agreement to be shorter with the ability to extend it based on performance and agreed upon benchmarks.
I like that. Just as a point of history, that's one of the things I recommended when I applied for this position, was to shorten up those term lengths on development agreements, because again, the city signs away so much leverage when they make it for
So much.
Great minds
30,
and all,
40
yeah.
years. So totally in agreement with that. And then the last section, sorry, Jared.
One more point, just to piggyback on Nathan's point on the specific value to the city. I think we should also have, and it's kind of goes along with it, is phasing of some of these things, right? Phasing those elements in with the build out, and then a non-performance clause, right? That if they don't perform in providing those things, not phasing, there has to be some sort of recourse for the city. Right?
So-
What we talked about is that they have to come up to current vested laws, ordinances, whatever.
So can I restate that so that my post 10 p.m. brain can comprehend it?
I'm having a hard time getting my brain to get it off the paper.
So what we're saying is that not only list the benefits to the city, but the time frame under which they, or the phasing under which they would be completed, and completion of those is inherently built into being in compliance with the contract.
Yep.
So if they missed one of those, they could be in default of the contract and we could dissolve the MDA. Okay, yeah.
And completing those is in relation to completing, the other parts of the development. So if it's mainly residential and they're saying we want all this residential and extra units because we're going to give you these extra amenities, well, then we want those amenities to be built kind of in proportion to residential, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Having to wait.
And I think we talked about that too, that we're okay with some of those being pooled up, if it's a much bigger amenity kind of thing, right? But yeah.
Okay.
And I think that could be put in the phasing, right? Like if it's a big amenity, it could be in phase 3 or 4. Smaller amenities would need to be in accompaniment with the rest of the development, so.
Sure, and this is just a policy outlining that there needs to be
What needs to be in the MDA.
Yeah.
Right. And that's exactly right, Jared. That's the last section of this policy, is just stating that before it comes to council, we will have a final staff review to make sure that those items are all included.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then we
So-
start delivering.
So it sounds like I've got some work to do, so I would recommend continuing this item. I can bring that back to you with those additions at the next meeting.
If only I
motion
could
to
accept his motion, but I can't.
Motion to continue item 9.9.
All right.
Second.
I have a motion by Steve and a second by Sherry. Call for the vote. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. That item will be continued. Item 9.10 is discussion consideration of an ordinance authorizing a text amendment to adopt language to enable large project master planned communities. Back to you, Chase.
Thank you. So this item was, has been discussed at the last few meetings, and the reason we continued it at the last meeting was just to, again, address this actual MDA policy. The only other outstanding question with regard to this master plan community tool was whether or not, and I'm just gonna jump through some of this. Exactly. Yeah, whether to include the threshold requirement for acreage to be 400 or 200 contiguous acres. Again, the Planning Commission did hold a hearing on this. The feedback from, there was one public comment, that feedback was to reduce the acreage from 400 to 200, which was the Planning Commission's recommendation on that as well. I'll also just jump forward again to the map.
That map, that's what made me
within the city.
Change my mind, yeah.
So you'll notice a couple of areas on the north end of the city are all under 100 acres. Obviously, we have outside of the current city boundaries, Olympia, which is almost 1,000 acres. We also have other areas within our annexation policy that are that have continuous ownership that would meet that threshold requirement of either 200 or 400. But the real areas of interest are on the south end of the city. So we have just at the southeast corner, the commercial industrial flex space areas totaling 229 acres of contiguous ownership. And then you'll notice in the bottom center of that map, there's Laguna and Malibu, which are actually owned by two separate entities. They are related entities, so they could potentially develop that land as one large master plan community. But one of those is, I believe, 246 acres, and the rest makes up the balance of that.
Acres on the other, yeah.
So that 200-acre threshold would allow for some additional development, again, in the southeast corner as well as in potential Laguna Malibu region.
There's all, and I want to make sure I understand this though. They don't have to do it as a large master plan community.
That's exactly
It's just
right.
saying you need to be at least 200 acres if you want to do a large master plan community zone.
That's exactly right.
Okay.
And going back to that, right? It does require a development agreement. All of these items that are bulleted here are required to be in that development agreement. Those are all covered by our MDA policy that we've just discussed. But it also allows them to use non-traditional zoning. So the city has established zones for residential, commercial, other special districts. What this tool allows them to do is to say, you know, given the topography or the issues with infill or, you know, whatever other conditions there might be, we would like to propose a zone that allows us to do something different than what is being currently allowed within the city. Again, this is all at the discretion of the city council. This isn't a zoning right that we have to grant to any applicant who wants to use this tool. It's simply discretionary based upon whatever conditions they might
But the reality
identify.
is, if you're going to be developing 200 acres all together, I think there's benefit in considering stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do too, but I do have one question. Would this item be continued until we finish up this other item and just do them both on the same night?
They're not necessarily tied, again, because this one does have requirements about what to include in a development agreement. And I mean, I think we can just call it out. The only application we would really anticipate seeing at this time would be for Olympia, right? If they're to use this tool, they would submit an application. We've already gone down the road of drafting a development agreement. So at this stage.
So is it going to enumerate those things, or is it going to reference the other ordinance of what the MDA would include?
Their application?
Yeah.
It would reference this MPC tool.
Yeah. And so I think I would restate Sherry's question then. Are we sure that that includes everything we just said?
Yeah, does the Olympia MDA include all of these things that we just said? Is that your question?
Right. No. Does let me make sure I'm doing this.
Yeah.
Does the large project master plan community motion that we are considering enumerate all of the things that we had just discussed previously on item 9.9 that needed to be included in the MDA.
We did have some additional ones that we had discussed.
So I think the question is, should we wait to make a motion on this until it's been updated to include all those enumerated things? Or should this ordinance just reference the MDA policy?
I would do it that way, just reference the MDA policy.
So we
And I
could
think
make
that
a
was the
motion
discussion.
saying, replacing that language with referencing the MDA.
But the MDA policy doesn't exist yet.
When, you could reference it when completed, right?
I just think it
Yeah,
just
you can,
seems-
you can continue it, you can pass
It
it
just
tonight.
seems cleaner just to continue it, because it's not
And do them at the
urgent.
same time.
And if we just do them at the same time,
I
then
think
the
that's-
policy's in place, this is in
Agreed.
place, because there's nothing, this isn't holding anything up, or nothing's.
We're still moving forward with the Olympia MDA, correct?
I would just say that I'll reference, sorry, Nathan, apologize for that. I'll just say, going back really to a comment that Steve made at the start of this, is that it doesn't, because it doesn't require somebody over that to go through this process, it's just a tool. Go back to the comments when we heard this the first time, is because it is a tool, I believe that that number should be 200 as recommended by the Planning Commission, because I think, again, it opens up the opportunities for this tool to be utilized. And then there's.
And since that was the only question, agreed.
Yes.
I agree
Yeah,
to that.
Nathan, go ahead.
I was just going to state, we can bring it back with the appropriate amended language, referencing the policy, so you don't have to worry about
Getting it
what
right.
that'll,
Right.
yeah, trying to think that. We'll figure out exactly how, and if they're adopted at the same time, just referring, we've established a numbering system for those policies, so it'll allow us to reference things a little easier.
Reference the policy
It
number.
just seems cleaner and easier just to do them both at the same time.
Agreed.
Jared, did you have any additional comments on this?
We'll all be glad to know the answer is no.
All right, with that, I will entertain a motion on item 9.10.
Motion to continue item 9.10
Okay,
until appropriate time to bring it back.
all right. Motion to continue by Steve,
Second,
second by Sherry. Call for the vote. Steve?
Yes.
Sherry?
yes.
Jared?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. That item is continued.
Sorry, we're making other.
All right, on to item
agendas on there. They should be quicker.
9.11. Discussion consideration of a proposed amendment to the Herman City Public Infrastructure District Policy. Chase.
Thank you. So it was the Clint show earlier, and it's the Chase show wrapping up this meeting, so. Yeah, well, I'm 0 for 2, and Clint did pretty well, so.
But no one was
No.
keeping score except me.
That's
No, they were
right.
keeping score.
Nobody was tracking that. So this item comes to you new after a finance group working meeting for the Olympia Hill discussion. Just by way of history, in June of 2020, the city council did adopt a policy on PIDs within the city, and that was not whether or not to accept a PID, but how an application for a PID would be processed. So that existing PID policy only allowed for a PID application to be considered by the council within the auto mall and not on any residential property. So that was the foundation for the council's existing policy. The amendments that we're proposing would allow for a PID to be considered, again, not approved, just to be considered on the auto mall, again, with those same conditions that it not include any residential property. But adding to that now, the Olympia annexation area, so long as it not be based upon a property tax levy, but rather a PID would be considered under this amended policy only within Olympia based upon a contract fee is what we're referring to it as within that group, or a one-time fee paid by the builder and not a recurring charge to the property owners within the PID district. So I've attached the existing PID policy with the red lines and the changes to that. I made some minor formatting changes and just some verbiage changes to make sure that everything was consistent throughout the policy. But the substantive and material changes to that are found in section 4.3.4. I'll just read that language for the record. It says, PID shall only be considered for the area depicted in Exhibit 1, which is the auto mall. The city may also consider the creation of one or more PIDs in the proposed annexation area known as Olympia and depicted in Exhibit 2, so long as the financing mechanism for such PIDs are based upon a contract fee and not a mill levy assessed against the property owners located within the PID. So that's the request by staff, is to amend that. There is an updated exhibit attached to that policy, capturing the area where that would apply. And again, that still would apply to the auto mall, which was previously established as a potential pit
But
area by the council.
The auto mall could still do a mill levy.
They could.
The Olympia Hills annexation area cannot do
Yes.
a mill levy. Got it.
Yes. So the way I wrote it is correct, yes, that auto mall could still consider that funding mechanism, but Olympia could only base it upon a contract fee.
Yeah, got it.
Any other questions? I think that, obviously, the discussion that took place in the finance working group that led to this was, going back to your point earlier, Steve, of the productivity that's come out of the process that we've been through is, I mean, this wasn't something that was even thought of, a few months ago.
And frankly, it may have caused Alan to lose a couple hairs. That was, I think it blew his mind, this idea that there's you could bond against a single source of repayment based only off the cash flow of the repayment, not with scheduled repayment. I mean, it's amazing that you can even do it.
No, I
so.
think it's, like I say, that's what you get out of a good collaborative process, is new innovative ideas. I think it's awesome, so. If there's no other comments on it, I would just entertain a motion.
Motion to approve Resolution R26-2021, approving an amendment to the Public Infrastructure District Policy.
Okay, we have a motion by Steve.
I'll second.
I will take the second by Jared. All right, we'll call for the vote on this. Steve?
Yeah.
Jared?
Yes.
Sherry?
Yes.
And I will vote yes as well. Item passes unanimously. Amazingly, we have reached the end of our regular agenda. By way of information, future meetings, the August 19th Planning Commission meeting that was regularly scheduled has been canceled, so no Planning Commission on the 19th. The next regularly scheduled City Council work meeting will be on August the 25th at 5:30, followed by the regular meeting at 7. And we have also added, I believe it's on the 24th, the Board of Canvassers for certification of the primary elections. And that's at 5:30, is that correct? 5, thank you.
The 24th.
On the 24th. Events, we have the Harriman Moto X, that's this Friday and Saturday, 13th and 14th at Butterfield Park. And then our ongoing Hungry Harriman Food Truck Roundup in the Farmers Market on the 16th at 5 p.m. in Crane Park. With that.
By the way, just a comment on that. That is awesome. Like the number of food trucks that are there, the number of vendors there, that's a really great thing. So if you're in the community, you haven't been there, come out and check that
Brings
out.
a
I
lot
think
of people out.
your family would really enjoy that for an evening out, yeah.
Absolutely. At this point, I will entertain a motion to adjourn our city council meeting and reconvene in our work meeting. We have one item still on the work meeting agenda.
So moved.
A motion, and was that a second, Sherry? Thank you very much. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Yeah, we almost got through it, Sherry. We were close.